This will be a bit short, but completely true. I grew up in a small town in British Columbia, Canada, around 7,000 people with my mom. The town I grew up in is a small area above the border and is heavily wooded on the outskirts of the city. We lived in my grandma's house until my mom could afford to get her own place around the age of 7. I remember one night the phone rang. I answered and said hello, to which I didn't hear anything, so I hung up. Then another ring. This time when I answered it, I could hear creepy giggling on the other end, which creeped the heck out of me. I gave the phone to my mom and she told me to go downstairs. Every so often, a few years, this would happen. The giggling and random calls with nobody on the other end, and I would usually forget about it. By the time I was 10, we had moved to a few different places in town, and I can't remember if it happened or not for a while, so I'm assuming it didn't. One night I was watching TV before bed and the phone rang. I answered to someone on the other end, saying my name in a weird whisper, and ran crying to my mom. She answered, and I can remember her saying, "Okay, you need to stop this." I can't quite remember what happened after. All I can remember is going to sleep. That night, I woke up to tapping on my window. I remember being too scared to move. Through the small crack, my window was open. I heard the whisper again, saying my name. "Maddie." I freaked the heck out. I took a few seconds, which felt like hours, to muster up the strength to run to my mom. She said I was having a bad dream, until she checked out my room and immediately called the police. The police showed up and caught a man hiding in the thick trees lining the yard. My mom had to have a big talk with me and explain that this man is my biological father and is mentally disturbed. The call stopped for a few years, but have happened since, only a handful of times. I'm now 18, and honestly, they don't disturb me as much as they used to. To my creepy biological dad, I will beat your ass if you come near me. I have both loved and been creeped the heck out while reading these stories. I have a couple that I would like to share. First, let me say that my mama was a mama bear. Probably a bit overprotective, but as we were entering the era of Adam Walsh, who could blame her? She kept a close eye on me and my sister. She was so protective that I found myself shrinking whenever there was a moment that I should have used my voice. My mom was my voice. This will come into play later. This particular Sunday, I was about 8 years old. Come to think of it, this was before Adam Walsh, around 1978. We drove to Shreveport to pick up my nanny, Grandma, and take her to lunch. We only lived an hour away and usually did this once a month. Our routine included lunch at Piccadilly and the mall, and then shopping or looking around. My favorite store was Hallmark, not for the cards ironically. I loved to look at the trinkets, journals, and ornaments. My mom knew this and so allowed me and my sister to go in. She and my nanny would sit on a bench right outside the store where she could look in at us through the glass. I had just walked in and was admiring the ornaments halfway back in the store when I heard, "Excuse me," behind me. I turned to see a boy, maybe 10 to 12 years old, standing behind me. "Hi, may I ask you a question?" he said. I remember even at my young age that the boy was very well spoken, almost like a salesman. His accent was not from the South. It sounded Midwestern or possibly Northern. The boy in general would not have been strange except when I looked at his face. He had a black eye and lacerations on his cheek covered with a band-aid. This boy had been beat up severely. He must have seen my shocked expression as he immediately said, "Yeah, I'm sorry about my face. It was an accident." He then quickly goes on to ask if I could help him find a card for someone's birthday for him, or something to that effect. I remember turning around and looking outside of the bench toward my mom. She was in a conversation with my nanny. My sister had already left Hallmark and was sitting beside Nanny. I willed my mom to make eye contact and come be my voice. Nope, she was focused on her conversation. Sigh. I turned back around and meekly said, "I don't know." He must have noticed the look in the direction of my mom and my hesitation as he said, "It's okay. You're safe. My mom is right back there." He points to a woman with her back towards us, looking at cards, pacing a bit. "The cards I'm looking at are right back here with her. Come on. It's okay. Come on." In retrospect, I can hear the desperation in his voice. I took 2 steps towards him, and when I did, I noticed that the woman was standing next to a door. I had that gut fear almost about everything back then, but in this moment, my stomach was in my mouth. I remember wondering where that door led. Every hair on my head stood on end. He would take a step back and say, "Come on, it's okay, really." Almost like I was a puppy he was trying to wrinkle. I was only 8 years old. But there was more than desperation in his voice now. There was fear. Something wasn't right. We were about 8 steps from his mom now. I immediately turned toward the mall exit and threw out a very frightened, "I've got to check with my mom." I remember the "with my mom" part. I was already out of the mall and headed towards her arms. I was in her lap in 10 seconds. She asked if I was okay and I just said, "Yeah, that boy was trying to talk to me." We both turned to look and the boy was looking out through the glass at us. As soon as he noticed my mom looking, he pretended to turn and look at cards. My mom just said, "Okay, you're alright," and turned back to my nanny in conversation. It was true. I was okay then. I think she just thought I was being shy and scared, which was usually the case. I saw the boy go back and talk to the woman or his mom. She did not look happy. I could just see fear coming off of him. She sent him back out into the store and turned back towards the cards, still standing near the door. In my adult brain, I realized that she was off, just like the boy. She was pretending to look at cards. She would occasionally glance back at the boy. I saw him go up to a couple of more people and talk. I can't remember if these people were kids or not. This could have simply been a situation where she was trying to get her son to open up and approach others in conversation. But everything in my gut tells me that she was using that boy as bait to abduct other kids. And had I gone back there with him, they would have tried to usher me out through that door into a waiting car. Then maybe I would have been bait in the future. I never told my mom about the entire incident. I knew her. She would have said, "Honey, you should have said this to him, or you should have come and gotten me." I was already ashamed that I would chicken out in moments like that. I wonder often what happened to that boy. I can still see his face. Dark eyes, olive skin, dark hair. Clothes slightly disheveled. I remember looking on the news to see if there were any abductions, but I also remember his accent. He was not from our Texas or Louisiana area. He could have been taken from anywhere. There were no Amber Alerts back then. A little beat-up boy in Hallmark. I remember you. I wish I had used my voice to possibly save you. I'm sorry I was too scared. I hope you are safe. In respect for my best friend, whose life was a mess as a child, I've been keeping this story inside for a very long time. I'm going to be completely honest, I've never even spoken a word to my mother. At first, it was fear of getting social services involved. Then, after they got involved anyway, I guess too long had passed and I just figured she never really would benefit any from knowing. This all happened when we were 11 years old. I'm 29 now. It all sort of feels like a surreal dream. This feels like the appropriate place to get it out. Names changed, of course. When I was in elementary school in Canada, that's K through 6, I was an awkward child. I have high-functioning autism, and while my grades were great, my social functioning was lackluster. Still is, if I'm honest. This left me with a fairly small, very colorful group of friends. Two of the closest are Jesse and Katie. I came from a fairly overprotective household. My mom watched me like a hawk, and thus I was a naive kid. I didn't really understand that a lot of the oddness and dysfunction that would come out of my two friends had to do with problems at home. We were never allowed at Katie's house. I think her mom was extremely overweight to the point of hardly being able to move, and she was embarrassed of it. Jesse's house, however, was only a few blocks away from the school. We ended up there a lot. Her parents were divorced, and her mom was deaf and mute. My mom and her would communicate through notes, and I would go over while she at first would always seem slightly erratic. There were no real red flags. When we first started going there, Jesse's mom was living with her boyfriend as well as her boyfriend's parents. Everybody in the household was deaf with the exception of Jesse and her younger brother, but both of them had limited hearing. I think for the first year or so we were there, the boyfriend's parents kind of kept everything from getting too out of hand, but it was pretty clear it was a dysfunctional household. After they moved out of the house, it was just Jesse's mom and her boyfriend. They would often lock us in the basement and I would spend the night. It was a full apartment, so we saw it as fun freedom. But the one time they forgot to lock it, we walked in on them doing something under the table with needles. Again, we were too young to understand, but we did understand that we walked into something bad. From this point on, we would be designated to spend our sleepover nights in her garage as it was furnished with carpets and couches. The issue with this was Jesse's mom always kept the door locked so we wouldn't interfere with her activities again. So when one of us had to use the washroom, we would have to knock on the basement window until Jesse's little brother would hear and let us in through the basement window to pee. Another issue being, he was hearing impaired. Thus sometimes it would take a literal hour of absolute banging on that window. We were young, and this felt as close to freedom as you could get. We didn't really understand why or that it was wrong or dangerous for Jesse's mom to do this, and I never told my mom. It kept going on. One night, we were doing our normal sleepover playing Pokemon Gold, trading and battling with link cables, and waiting for Jesse's mom to bring out the oven pizza that she said she was cooking us hours ago. It was about midnight, no bedtime in that house, and Katie said she really had to pee. She was trying to wait for Jesse's mom to bring in the pizza so she could go through the door, but she couldn't hold it. She goes out by herself to try and rouse Jesse's little brother Aaron. We were expecting it to take her a little while, but to our surprise, she comes back extremely quick, locking the garage door behind her and latching the lift door. She looks really startled. She tells us that she was knocking to try to get Aaron's attention when she hears a rustle from the bush next to the gate going to the front yard. It takes her a minute to realize what she's looking at, but standing about 5 feet from the gate, 15 feet from the window Katie is at, is a tall man dressed completely in black. She said it seemed like he just appeared out of the darkness, or like he was waiting for something. He asked her if she's managed to lock herself out while slowly taking a step towards the gate. As she gets up and takes a step back, his pace quickens towards her and she sprints back to the garage. At first, we thought she was just shifting with us. We laughed and told her to stop messing around. Then we heard it. Hard twisting of the locked doorknob. Then worse. The sound of scratching metal against the knob. He was trying to pick the lock. We stood in absolute fear for a moment, then grabbed the only pathetic things around we could use to try to defend ourselves. Then it just abruptly stopped. There were no windows in her garage and no peephole on the door. We couldn't see what was going on. We waited for about 10 minutes, having no idea where the man was, if he was still out there, where her mom was, or where that freaking pizza had gone to. But we were like sitting ducks in there. He had clearly failed to pick the lock, but who knows if he would try or what he would try next. Now this is stupid, but we were stupid freaking scared children. We grabbed our weapons, which consisted of glorified sticks, and we left that garage. At first there was no sign of the man. We moved towards the downstairs window and started slamming on it, screaming and pleading for Aaron to open it. Again, that's when we heard it. It was an almost sing-song, mocking voice that rang out. Well, hello again. 3 men, all in black. The one in the middle had spoken. They made a move forward. We once again sprinted back to the garage. This time, they just straight tried to kick in the door, all 3 of them stomping and kicking. It was close to giving in, and then everything stopped. Jesse's mom had come out the back door, pizza in hand, and startled them. She ran back inside and got her boyfriend and his 2 other friends. Users travel in packs, and they were able to chase them off with some actual weapons. I'm guessing we were still inside the garage. We could honestly just hear it. The adults stayed in the backyard all night, weapons in hand. One person even sat on the roof with a compound bow. Night turned to morning and it all settled down. We never stayed at Jesse's house for sleepovers after that. She was put into the care of her grandparents shortly after. It took me a really long time to actually grasp what happened that night, but considering they never called the police, I'm fairly sure we almost got literally murdered over some drug debt Jesse's mom had. Literally can't imagine the evils that could have gone on that night if fate wasn't on my side. Something tells me those 3 men were way too happy to find children to take as penance, and it would hardly have just been a straightforward murder. Still makes me shudder. I don't post too often, but I've been reading through all of these posts, and it sparked an encounter I had years ago on a solo bike tour. It was the spring after I graduated college, 22 female, and didn't know what I wanted to do with my life, so I decided to take a pause and ride my bike down the coast from Canada to Mexico. I was pretty nervous to be going by myself, but for the majority of the time, I felt safe. Halfway through or so, I got pretty comfortable with sleeping alone in fairly empty campsites, parks, etc. There were even some stretches on the trip where I rode with other bike tourists. This one encounter, however, brought my guard back up for the remainder. I was halfway down the Oregon coast and was a mile or so from the campground I'd planned to stay in for the night. There was this notable yellow vintage Ferrari, car that had passed me in the opposite direction. When I pulled into the campground, I stopped at the information board to look at the map and fees. As I'm sitting there, I see the yellow car coming down the road and stopping where I am. This older guy in his late 50s or early 60s gets out and starts looking at the board with me. He's friendly and seems completely normal, charismatic even. He's asking me about my trip and starts mentioning how he's from the area but has never checked out this campground. At this point, I'm still pretty naive, and there are plenty of nice people I've met on the trip that chat me up and ask about the bike tour. He's talking to me and getting closer, and this is the part that starts making me uneasy. He would repeatedly reach out his hand to shake mine like he was about to leave, but every time he shook my hand, he would grab my forearm with his other hand and do this weird gasp laugh thing. The way he did it looked insane, and the arm grasp was very firm. It sent shivers down my spine. Then he drives into another topic and repeats this freaky handshake maybe 2 more times in between. I realize that I'm completely out of sight from anyone in the campground, have no phone service, and I'm now very close to him and his open car door. There's a knot in my stomach. I'm on the verge of tears, and my voice is shaking with every response. At this time, I didn't even know why, but something felt very off about him. I finally speak up loud, hoping somebody can hear me, and tell him I gotta get going. Run to my bike and speed to the campground. When I get there, I don't even try to find the hike and bike spots and just throw the tent down directly across from the camp host. Again, I had a lot of encounters with random strangers at this point, but none of them terrified me like this one. I fought with the idea that he was probably just an overly friendly guy, but the fact he would repeatedly grab my arm and laugh was frightening. All in all, most people I met were very sweet, and it made me very trusting of others. Even if he were harmless, his actions were a good reminder that I had to be mindful of my vulnerable situation and be more alert. I used to order a lot of pizza. I love pizza. Well, my local pizza place got a new driver who way overstepped the boundaries of what is acceptable. He tried to force his way into my home to share dinner with me, and just general creepy behavior. So I stopped ordering pizza. Well, really, I never noticed anything. I have a security system, so I figured all is well, and I never check it really. About 2 months after the pizza incident, I hear scratching at the side of my home. I figure it's animals. I live outside the city, so there are animals usually looking for a place to nest. There was a big fresh coating of snow. So I do what I usually do and let my dog out. He is a huge 120-pound King Shepherd ex-Maremma, and he just bolts out of the door. Again, not unlike him when there's an animal outside. But around 20 seconds later, I hear screaming and swearing, then screaming in pain and terror. You scream for my dog to come back, he does. He is a good boy, and I call the police. Well, they do a search of the outside of the house. What they find is blood, lots of it, and pry marks at the side of it. We go through the footage, and sure enough, there's a person who is trying to force open the window. The dog charges him and tears up his ass and leg pretty bad until I call him back. He gets up and limps off my property. Well, at the front of my property, the entrance to my drive, I have a camera. It's well hidden. I get the guy going to his car and his plate. The cops take it and go to the hospital. There was a lot of blood and the person would need medical attention. Well, the guy said, "Oh, I was trying to surprise my girlfriend and I fell. Man, I am a widow. I never plan on dating again for the rest of my life." But they come back to my house, tell me this, and show me a picture. Surely enough, it was the pizza guy. They found rope, duct tape, a camera, and a knife in his car. So, take that shit seriously. This happened last night. I worked late at our retail shop. We close at 5 p.m. except for 6 weeks during the summer when there are street dances from 7 to 9 right out in front of our place. We are one of the sponsors and we give 2 $25 gift certificates as prizes for each of the weeks. Since many folks who attend are on vacation here, I like to stay open during the street dance. If somebody wins, they can walk 50 feet over to spend their prize, even if it's the last night of their trip. Plus the music is cool. They always have a good band. So after closing and doing the books, I got home about 10 o'clock. Normal. It's just my wife and me plus the dog and 4 cats. We tend to go to bed and get up early. It's a rural area. We have neighbors, but we're on a quiet lake and it was all quiet and dark by the time I rolled in. The wife and I often sleep in separate rooms because she has trouble getting to sleep and I do not at all. I trained myself to go to sleep fast decades ago and it has stayed with me. I can often get to sleep in 2 or 3 minutes, and I snore. We both do, but I definitely take the laurels for volume. I have woken myself up with loud snoring more than a few times. So I was unsurprised and unbothered to see a note asking me to sleep in one of the spare bedrooms when I entered the dark and quiet house. Our main bedroom is in the finished basement and she was there. So I settled into the place I usually choose in the upper level. It's a double bed in a small bedroom that also hosts my laptop, the dog's feeding station, and a water fountain for all pets. I like the flowing water sound. I recently washed this set of bedding and reinstalled it back on this bed instead of changing it out for another set. Just part of normal household chores, but I know I'm the one who handled it the last several times in a row. It's pretty fresh. It has been used 3 nights since then. About 4 a.m. or so, my best estimate, I woke up feeling something odd and blocky on the edge of my bed nearest the wall away from me. And it wasn't just doing something loose. It was a hard squared off lump underneath the sheet. Not very small. Bigger than my hand, just a little. A really weird thing to feel at that time in that place. I told myself it was a weird dream and went back to sleep. I woke up at my normal time of 6 feeling a bit groggy. I fell over to the side of the bed where the blocky object had been. Still there. I pulled at the sheet and was able to remove it. It was a piece of 2x4, 6 or 7 inches long. Odd as heck. Convinced I was clearly still dreaming, I rolled over and went back to sleep. I woke up at about 6:30 feeling a bit closer to normal. Got up, had coffee and breakfast, did chores, tended critters and plants, and headed off to the shop. Got in this evening about 6. Watched Prey on Hulu with the wife. Agreed to sleep in the same places, ate dinner, did normal evening at home stuff, came into the room, and began getting ready for bed. Sitting on the cedar chest across from the bed is a 6 to 7 inch piece of 2x4. We haven't had any chunks of 2x4 sitting around this place in 6 years since I finished out the basement. I burned all the leftovers in our fire pit by the lake years ago. There have been no visitors and there is no lumber stored here, period, scrap or otherwise. I'm stumped as to how this piece of wood appeared where and when it did. It's enough out of place as to have me thinking I dreamt it when encountering it first. I don't have any known enemies, and it's not like waking up to a horse's head in the bed. What's the message to a piece of wood? Yet, I am a bit creeped out at how it could have got to be where it is. Are the trees sending me messages? What the heck? Anyone? Edit. I posted this last night just before going to sleep for the night. This morning I looked and the wood was still there, though it looks more like 4 to 5 inches long, so my sleepy brain overestimated the original length I stated. I experienced something else mildly odd. The desk light was on when I woke up. This was at 4, earlier than I wanted to be up, so I rolled over and went to sleep again until 6. It's never turned itself on before, but has a touch sensor for power and light level, so maybe it flaked last night. Odd and annoying. Light woke me, so I'm pretty sure it came on right before I woke and noticed it. I have it turned so the digital clock face on it doesn't shine towards the bed because even that is too much light for me to enjoy trying to sleep through. I read the post on the vanishing lumber. Sounds like as good an idea as any. Though, if things are going to appear in my vicinity via tiny wormholes, or whatever that means, maybe let's do money next. It appears to be a very normal piece of wood, 2x4, unmarred, no tooth marks, etc. For clarity, the chunk of wood was found underneath the fitted sheet in the bed. The fitted sheet was otherwise in place as expected. The layers of material in the bed are frame, box spring, mattress, mattress cover, fitted sheet, flat sheet, and comforter. There are also 5 pillows. I have acid reflux and extra pillows help reduce nighttime incidents. Also, I like one under my knees for an achy back. The dog is an elderly and small Sheltie. She doesn't really do toys. The wife and I are her toys. She herds us. She can barely jump up on that bed, but I have seen her get up there on her own. I have put her up, but as soon as I stop petting her, she's down. She was stray before we adopted her, and I suspect a former male presence in her life was really critical of her being on furniture. She doesn't really get on it much. The cats, well, one of them plays with toys a lot, including tennis balls, but I can't see him picking up the wood chunk and getting it into the bed. Much less under a fitted sheet without removing the sheet from the bed on at least one corner. I have no other Reddit accounts for the person suspicious as such, and if you look at my post history, it should be obvious I'm real and far from perfect. I tend to think such things are worth an occasional peek if you believe somebody may be less than honest. When I sleep in this bedroom, I shut the door. This is primarily because one of our cats has a tendency to come get me at about 5 a.m. every morning if I don't, and get me He will. It is an emergency. There is less than 1/3 of the food left in his bowl. How could I be sleeping through such a crisis? I must arise and correct this life-ending emergency this instant. So yes, I shut the door. Our windows that are open are casement windows that crank outwards. They are by default proof against casual entry when closed. Locking them does make them more secure, but you have to break the mechanism to get into one that is closed. It's a 100-plus-year-old lake cabin too. The windows that don't open are plate glass. Nobody that looks at my should have been repainted last year residence is under the impression I have a bunch of art or money in here. I asked my wife. She cackled about the giving wood comments. Guess that was the clue. I'm still puzzled by this all. I'm sorry if this is long and reads like a fever dream. This happened on my 19th birthday. I was living in Vermont on a mountain away from home as a working student on a massive horse breeding farm. It was February and obviously very snowy. We left a multi-day out-of-state event in the evening to head back to the farm. I was driving my own car, a sporty old coupe, but front-wheel drive, with new sales rep as a passenger. We are both women and she was maybe 25. The other working students were riding with the boss in the big rig or with another who was driving her van. We convoyed with everyone else until about 12 a.m. when the trailer had an issue near Albany, New York. We had encountered snowfall all night as there was a blizzard going on, but it was now getting bad around this time/area. The boss told me and the sales rep to keep going so that we could make it back for morning chores in case they didn't. The barn manager was the only one who stayed back at the farm. We knew she slept like a sloth on tranquilizer and she was expecting to have the day off since we would all be back. Everybody else stayed so that there was enough hands to unload the horses if needed. The rest of the trip, around 3 a.m., the sales rep and I reached the back roads to get up the mountain to the farm. At this point there was about 4 inches of snow on the roads. We kept having trouble getting up hills and tried every route we could think of. I didn't have a lot of gas left and we were tired and getting nervous. The sales rep suggested another route she thought she knew and I figured why not. I had never been this way because I would simply drive the same way down the mountain to go to town on my day off. We got pretty far with this other road, but snow was still falling and I was having trouble with the hill again. At this time we saw a house, extremely far and few between, in that area. And I was able to pull into the bottom of the driveway. It looked like they had a truck up there and there was a light in the window. So we decided that we should knock and ask them if they could drive us to the farm. I know this sounds totally nuts, but everybody knew of the farm and the boss had been there forever and seemed to know everyone personally. Plus we were together, so we figured it would be okay and it would hopefully be a nice man who knew our boss. Of course, this is where it gets weird. We are walking up and suddenly a dog starts viciously barking and lunging at the end of a very short heavy chain that is attached to a tree in a blizzard at night. This startled the heck out of us and obviously we didn't like it on an ethical level even, but the house was only a few yards away now, so we sprinted to it. We get to the door and right as the sales rep is about to knock, I grab her hand now because that we're close up and not chatting or dealing with a scary dog. I notice the door is only a piece of plywood on hinges and the little house is a crappy looking shack. Basically like they built their own permanent shelter but didn't have the skills to do it nicely. Meanwhile, the dog is still barking and lunging on the chain. She sees what I see and we decide to back away and then end up running to the car because it was just one of those redneck properties that you imagine wouldn't appreciate visitors. It snapped us back into our senses that there could be multiple men inside or something dangerous, so especially considering the dog situation. I managed to drive up that hill that was giving me trouble before, and as we get going, we see a herd of mini horses run across the road in a line and jump into the woods. We had a good idea. Maybe not the best, considering what just happened, that if we found a farm along this road, it could be their horses and they'd be grateful for our help, catching them and driving us home. Not long after, we came to a well-kept little farm, and the road was a dead end right after. The sun was starting to come up now. We leave the car on the road and walk up to the house, which isn't set far back at all. We knock endlessly and nobody answers. Just as we started walk back to the car, the sales rep spotted something running up the road. It's the dog. We ran like heck to the car and got in just in time for the dog to jump around the outside of it, biting the mirrors and whatever it could get a hold of like he was deranged. To be clear, I love dogs. We lived with the manager's pit bull, and I've now been working with dogs in many settings, including shelters, for years. I have had bites and have worked with court-declared dangerous dogs. I have never seen one in person as aggressive as this before or since. We got the heck out of there, and I drove as fast as I safely could away from the dog. We didn't see anything else on the road or glancing down the driveway of that shack driving past it again. When we got stuck on the next hill, we simply parked at the end of another driveway and sat there. My gas light was on and we were using the battery to run the heat. We were completely delirious, just laughing and crying while keeping on the lookout for the dog or a crazy man. Eventually, around 6:30 a.m., we saw a plow truck coming and got to flag it down. He knew our boss and gladly plowed our way home. I really do believe someone sicked the dog on us because the chain was so heavy and we were almost a mile up the road when it got to us. We also had been watching the mirrors as we left the shack because we were so freaked out already. Whether they thought they were going to break in or were just mad that somebody came up to the driveway, we'll never know. I'm just glad it was an almost creepy encounter with whoever lived in the mountain shack. This is an oddly disgusting story. Last week, I had to catch the bus to and from work as my car was in the shop. On Thursday night, it was about 8:30 when I got to the bus stop. Sitting there was a lady in her mid-20s sitting in the shelter, and a guy, likely early 30s, sitting on a couple of steps behind the bus stop shelter. I stood against the wall waiting for my bus. It was the second bus scheduled to stop there. As I waited, I noticed the guy look up at the woman whenever she would look down at her phone, like he was nervous she would see him. The woman had a bottle of water next to her. As the first bus approached, she dropped the bottle of water in the bin. In the bottle was probably a mouthful of water at the bottom. As I watched her sit down and the bus drive away, I noticed the guy got up and was looking in the bin after 5 or so minutes. He reached his arm into the bin and pulled out the bottle of water. He then ran over to a car parked across the road but south of the bus stop. I could see in his car as it was facing towards the bus shelter. I couldn't help but wonder what he was doing with the bottle. I would look up slightly every so often, and on the fourth time, I could see in the light of his car. I saw he was sniffing the water in the bottle, and then the part that made me feel ill, he licked the rim of the bottle, replaced the lid, and placed it on the seat next to him. As he drove past, we locked eyes, and he looked as if he had hit the jackpot. I felt sick in the bottom of my gut, as if I had just witnessed a crime, but with no real victim. I never saw either of them again. Okay, so this is long, but there's a lot of info. So, my mom is newly widowed, October, and had been with my dad for 48 years. She still looks great, is classy, and has always been faithful to my dad, and because of this, has always had a line of guys interested in her, including this one. I'll call him Todd. Todd has known her and my dad for years through a local watering hole they all went to. Not together, and they were friendly from there. He finds out my dad had passed away recently, so a month ago, Todd started showing up to my mom's work. She works at a local store as a cake decorator. He initially comes in and talks to her, which isn't out of the ordinary. She has many customers who come talk to her regularly, but this time Todd says some things that let us know he has been looking for info about her online. He first says, "You're 65." And she says, "Yeah," kind of confused why he's saying that. He then says, "You were born on such and such date." And she says, "Yeah," still confused. Then he says her phone number. From then on, he began contacting her a lot. She didn't think much of it at first, but even those are major red flags in my opinion. Todd starts coming to her work more regularly, calling and saying, not asking to come over too. She would say no, but he would still show up and be super pushy about things. When he would show up, she would let him in but say, "Fine, but you can only stay a half hour," etc. He would come in. They would talk and sometimes have a drink, and she would tell him it's time to leave. This continues for a few weeks, and then I come home to visit. My mom hadn't even told me about him before this, and then she comes home from work one day and is noticeably worked up. She said she has a friend coming over and it is a guy. I laugh and say, "Mom, it's fine. I know my dad would have been okay with it and wouldn't have wanted her to wait. He would want her to find somebody and be happy." She said they aren't dating or anything, but warns me that the other guy often acts like they are a couple even though they are not. So Todd comes over, and sure enough, he does just that. I'm confused initially, and by the way he is acting, it seems like they have been dating for a few months, and I'm wondering if my mom was just afraid to tell me. She's acting weird, but I can't put my finger on it. She keeps saying in front of him that he acts like they are a couple even though they aren't. He just laughs it off and tries to grab her hand, or put his hand on her leg. Then she goes into another room, and he tells me how nervous he was to meet me. He starts crying, and I think for a moment he is going to ask if it is okay to propose, because he is so serious and going on and on about how much she means to him. He tells me that my mom was sobbing to him, and he hugged her, and that she just sank into him. It was creepy AF. Of course she is going to be sobbing because her husband of 48 years just passed away, and my dad adored her. He also makes some alarming comments, like saying my mom spends too much money. She really doesn't, and hasn't had a lot her whole entire life, but she is better off now financially than when my dad was here because of a few different things. My parents only recently, as in within the last 5 years, purchased their first house. He also tells her privately that she is not allowed to go out with my daughter and me that weekend. I find this out later. Needless to say, I'm not feeling good about him, and I'm lost at this point, and fuming because I don't know when this all took place. I also need to add that Todd used to work with my husband. I wouldn't have even known, as I didn't initially recognize the name, but my mom mentioned it to me. So I called to ask him about the guy, not even telling him why at first, and he instantly tells me he is a snake in the grass, untrustworthy, manipulative, and vindictive. He goes on to tell me that the guy was fired for stealing company time, and reminds me that he has told me about him before. About 15 years ago, Todd told my husband at work that Todd would be married to my mom if it wasn't for my dad. I then remember the conversation and how we all laughed and joked about it back then. I'm also very concerned at this point because I realize he had had this obsession with her for over 15 years now. So I don't address it with my mom that night because I want to collect my thoughts and don't want to hurt her feelings. The next day, she has a hair appointment, and Todd had heard her talking about it. I come back from the store, and Todd's vehicle is in the drive. I'm not happy at all about it. I go in, and he's there talking and standing with her in the kitchen. She tells me right away that he just stopped to see her hair real quick. I find out later he just showed up without calling. He also kept asking questions and seemed a little too interested in our St. Patrick's Day plans that first night. We were going to meet up with my grandpa and go out for a bit, as we are Irish and it is a big deal in our family. I could see he was taking mental notes of what we were saying when we talked about it, so it wasn't surprising when he brought it up the next day at my mom's. I made it a point to barely say anything, and he left a few minutes later. He leaves, and I tell my mom right away that he is not freaking coming with us the next day. She immediately says okay, and that she doesn't even really like him that much anyway, so she's fine with that. To my relief. Then he knocks at the door again and walks in and says he left his phone here. My mom says he couldn't have left it anywhere but the kitchen because they didn't go anywhere else in the house, but he makes a weird point of saying it must be on the couch when they were in there, and sure enough, it's there. Even though my mom swears they didn't even go in there. They are right next to each other, and he easily could have set it there real quick while talking to her. I almost felt as though he was listening outside, but I can't be sure. So he leaves, and I explained to her what my husband said. My husband was very concerned, mind you, to the point he said we needed to contact her work because Todd would try to get her fired as well as contact the police and let the neighbors know. I am very concerned for her safety at this point. She trusts my husband with her life, so she takes it very seriously and says okay. She goes on to tell me she had only been talking to him for a few weeks and that he kept stopping by even though she would tell him not to. She did kind of like him but wasn't really invested or anything like that, and I think honestly she just liked having somebody to talk to. She tells me that he was going through a divorce, but they hadn't finalized it because he was still on her insurance. I get that, but then he tells her that he just went to a lawyer to finally get it done. She tells him, well, I hope that isn't because of me or anything, and he tells her, well, I already paid $5,000 to the lawyer. It makes her feel obligated to him. I also find out from my uncle that he had a run-in with him. The very first week they were talking, Todd got my mom some tires for her car. She paid for them, he just picked them up. He drops them off and my uncle is shoveling the snow in her driveway. Todd comes up and doesn't even say hi or ask him who he is, but just says, how old are you? In a weird way. My uncle tells him and then explains how he is related. Todd doesn't respond and walks off into the house. When he comes back out, my uncle says, thanks again for doing that for her. We really appreciate it. Todd doesn't even acknowledge him and just gives him dirty looks, like he is jealous. I also find out that Todd told my mom some ridiculous story about my dad offering to do drugs with him at the bar, knowing my mom is against that kind of thing and she obviously can't question my dad. It is like he is competitive with my dad, who isn't even here, and it infuriates me that he would badmouth him and say something that I know isn't true. So that brings us to St. Patrick's Day. Todd shows up to her work again and just says, "Give me your keys, I'm gonna wash your car." My mom says, "No, you can't take my car." He has never driven it before. He is just this pushy and presumptuous. She tells him he can't go with him that night and he can't come over anymore and can't call. She goes on to explain that we don't think he is good for her, that my husband is concerned, and that she wholeheartedly trusts him, so that he is to not contact her anymore. She calls me to tell me this, and while I'm on the phone with her, I start hearing somebody pounding on the door. It's him, I find out, but I don't answer. I'm not sure how it was even possible to get there that fast. He knocks for 15 minutes and then leaves a note in the door for me to call him. I don't call but text and tell him I got the note, but don't feel we need to have a phone conversation about anything. I tell him my mom explained the situation already. She doesn't want to see him anymore and he needs to respect that. He responds saying he deserves to know who said what. I tell him that's not necessary and we would have felt the same based on our interaction with him. I failed to mention earlier my daughter was also there when we met and realized she knew him. She was the main bartender for a year at the bar he frequents and she hated him. He constantly tried to tell her how to do her job. When he met her, he tried acting like he didn't know her at first. He pleads with me to speak to him on the phone and I say it's not a back and forth discussion and he needs to respect that. He then goes on and says he thinks it's all BS and that nobody said anything at all. I tell him I will do everything in my power to make sure he stays away at this point, that we have notified his work, neighbors, and the police. He continues to call that night. We have not heard from him directly since then, but he sent a mutual friend to my mom's work to let her know that Todd said he won't bother her anymore, but that if she wanted to call him in a few weeks after everybody settled down, she could. This worries me that he is still holding out hope. It also worries me about what will happen when I leave tomorrow. He knows I am leaving tomorrow as well. This happened a couple of summers ago as my boyfriend and I were driving home along a remote forest service road in British Columbia, Canada, returning from a camping trip. We are pretty familiar with the area we were in, having camped there several times before. Typically, the only people we encounter out here, a good 70 kilometers from paved roads, are fellow campers in off-road vehicles or logging truckers on the job. This particular day was beautiful, sunny, and warm, mid-June. We were bumping down the road at a good pace when we saw a man come out of the bush and began frantically waving at us. Very odd. We slowed down and came to a stop, with my boyfriend rolling down the window to see what this guy had to say. I was in the passenger seat, and as soon as we slowed down, I picked up a weird vibe. He was wearing a blue plaid construction worker's flannel coat, much too heavy for the warm weather, with khaki pants and work boots. He was clean shaven with messy gray-brown hair, pale skin, and large glasses. He was maybe 50. Let me stress how unusual it is to run into somebody way out there without a vehicle. The guy was fairly soft-spoken and calmly, almost robotically told us that his car battery is dead. He asked us for a jump. Okay, sure. We believe in road karma and always want to help people out in trouble when we're in the bush. But where is the car? He tells us that he's been fishing all day and has been playing his radio, and it caused his battery to die. His car is down a very overgrown side road a little further up the main road. He walks ahead while we slowly follow behind him in our truck. Both my boyfriend and I are a bit weirded out, and we joke around with each other as we're following him that we hope he's not luring us in the bush to kill us. Except I legit felt on edge, and the joke didn't seem that funny. We followed him about 150 meters down the overgrown side road into a small heavily treed area, just wide enough for about 4 cars to park side by side. We never would have noticed this road if it hadn't been pointed out to us because bushes had nearly covered the entrance. Anyway, sure enough, there is a car there, an older model, beige Chevy car that looks very unsuited to the rough logging roads. The trunk is open for some reason and a blanket is draped over it. The hood was already popped on the car, so my boyfriend got out, grabbed our jumper cables from the back seat of our truck, and began attaching the cables to the car. Meanwhile, I swung my leg over the center console and slid into the driver's seat. I felt very uneasy and looked around the cab for anything that could be a weapon, all while telling myself I was being silly. But nonetheless, I wanted to be ready to act if something threatening happened. The guy chatted with my boyfriend jovially, telling him about his buddy he was fishing with, but apparently he went on ahead without him. But his friendliness seemed forced. He stood back, allowing my boyfriend to do everything, lingering behind him watching while the boyfriend got the car batteries hooked up. There was an awkward pause and my boyfriend had to prompt the guy to get in his car to crank it over. Throughout this, I sat in the driver's seat watching, feeling tense. The car fired up easily and the guy got back out of his driver's seat. He said thank you in an oddly intense way. My boyfriend removed the cables and hopped onto the passenger seat without bothering to put the cables away properly, and the moment the passenger door closed, I was reversing back down the narrow side road with branches scraping across both sides of our car. We got onto the main road within moments and went on our way. My boyfriend told me that the guy watched us the entire time as I backed down the road. Could have just been a socially awkward guy with a legitimately dead battery, but I can't help but feel this guy's intentions were more sinister, and the fact that I stayed vigilant in the car and that my boyfriend was efficiently competent with the jumper cables helped us dodge a bullet. Not sure if the battery was really dead, but neither of us remember seeing any fishing gear. This happened all the way back in 1998 when I was in grade 7. Our school system required that all students take a semester of woodshop and a semester of home economics every year of middle school. Semesters were 5 months long. In my part of Canada at that time, middle school was grades 7 and 8. Our woodshop teacher was a man in his mid-50s named Mr. P. He had quite a reputation. Older girls warned younger girls every year. If you were female, you never wanted to be stuck alone in his class with him. If you got detention, you begged a classmate to either intentionally get into trouble so you deserved detention together, or begged to have them stay late to work on their project after school. Anything to avoid being alone with him, as the older girls said he would start to say hugely inappropriate and graphically sexual things, and then even start touching. Starting with the girl's hands, arms, then her hair, shoulders, back, and then, well, worse. Much, much worse. It was an open secret. The principal and school board had to have known, but things weren't like how they are now. People didn't listen when kids complained, and the school board was heavily invested in covering for bad or abusive teachers. We were sort of left having to deal with these things on our own, with no support and no adult help. Wendy was a girl in my class. We weren't close friends, as she hung with a different group than I did, but we got on well enough. Reasonably good acquaintances, I guess. One day, Wendy got in trouble for talking in class when Mr. P was trying to go over safety info for a new piece of equipment and was given detention. Her friends were all on the same sports team, which was leaving the school right at the dismissal to go play another school's team, so they couldn't stay with her. Wendy had been given detention by Mr. P once before, for talking when she shouldn't be, so she was petrified at the prospect of being stuck alone after school with Mr. P again, and she went from classmate to classmate for the rest of the day, begging for their help. Everyone had some reason they couldn't stay, so she was getting absolutely desperate and was nearly in tears. Finally, she got to me. I wasn't on the sports team. I was a clumsy, bookish, shy, nerdy kid who avoided sports whenever possible and didn't have anything on after school that day, so I agreed. I would stay and work on the crappy birdhouse project we'd been assigned. Wendy got to Mr. P's classroom before me. I had stopped in my locker in the washroom before going to the shop room. When I got there, Mr. P was already sitting right beside Wendy, and it looked like he was about to stroke her hair. When he saw me, he yanked his hand away as if he'd been burned and stood up, putting space between him and her. He glared at me and demanded to know why I was there. I stammered out that the lie I wanted to work on my birdhouse assignment. In reality, I was further ahead in my project than most of the others were, so instead of grabbing my nearly finished birdhouse from the rack, I grabbed Wendy's and began working on it. For the entire 45-minute detention, he sat at his own desk, silently seething and glaring at me. When Wendy's detention was over, we took off nearly at a run. She thanked me profusely, and that was that. As far as I know, Mr. P has never faced any real consequences for being a creep pervert. I'm absolutely certain that he has sexually assaulted many girls over his long career. What a frickin' creep. A little over a month ago, I had gone to pick up an item from a seller who, for the sake of anonymity, we will call Mike, who lives in Canada. We exchanged a few messages regarding pickup, and he was dead set on meeting just outside his house. He wouldn't budge on it and said word for word. if not specific place here, then I am done here. He seemed to have quite a stubborn and aggressive temper right off the bat, so I was hesitant to even meet him, but the item I was looking for was something that was sold out online everywhere, so the fact I found one for sale for much cheaper than its original price won me over. It turns out my gut instinct was right from the start, because when I went to do the pickup, it got worse. He told me he liked to kill and skin animals for fun. He tried to bribe me into his apartment or walk me back to where I was headed. He was asking where I lived in high detail, and at one point he even tried to put his hands on me, but I took a step back and stood my ground. He was asking a lot of really personal and quite frankly creepy questions, and though I didn't answer them in the ways he probably expected me to, I just tried to act polite and not upset him any further, as in his messages he was saying that he was angry and had a horrible day. Once we went our separate ways, he acted all giddy over the fact that the app supposedly links your phone number to your account, and that would be his way of keeping in touch with me. Needless to say, I blocked his account, as he seems to be a really dodgy and sketchy character. He looked miserable and upset when I said I didn't use social media, which I truthfully don't, but he was desperate to stay in contact with me somehow. Keep in mind, this man looked to be in his late 30s or 40s, slim build, white dude who claimed to have some super attractive wife he met on plentyoffish.com. Yeah, creepy. I was tempted to file a report against him with the police, but because he technically didn't do anything, I found that it would be pointless to do so, and instead I am posting a warning about it here on Reddit. Please stay safe out there. Have somebody tough with you, or really anyone with you, even if it's a group of people. I legitimately feel like this seller is capable of harming another human being, and it's only a matter of time. This happened to me almost 20 years ago, but it still gives me the creeps. I had booked a taxi with a licensed taxi firm, long before the days of Uber, to take me from a friend's house to my home in the early evening. It was dusk as the driver arrived. As I left the house to get into the car, he was coming to the house to get me, and for some reason, as he turned to walk back to his car with me, he briefly touched my shoulder with his hand. It wasn't lingering, but it was deliberate, and my immediate thought was, why is this guy touching my shoulder? My intuition said it wasn't right, but I was in my 20s and this guy must have been in his 50s, and I convinced myself that it was just something people from that generation did. I sat in the back. The journey should have been around 20 minutes from North to South London, and in the first 5 minutes of the journey, there was some initial chat where he told me I was his last job of the day, and he had no plans afterwards. When he told me that, I felt a pang of fear, but I thought, this guy is from a licensed firm. He's been identity checked and approved to do the job. His ID card with his name and photo and registration number was clearly displayed on the dash. He was from a firm my friend used regularly and had an account with, although she had not met this particular driver. My logical brain told me that he's clearly traceable to me if he decides to do anything, so he just wouldn't take that risk. Plus, it was early evening in a very busy area, and that made me feel safer. Also, by this time we were already on the road. I spent the next 15 minutes or so of the journey looking at my phone. I really don't know why. Maybe I was purposely trying to distract myself because I was nervous, but I felt my nerves were very unreasonable. This was the early 2000s, so the phone would have been basic compared to today's standards, but there must have been a game, I'm thinking snakes, or something on it that distracted me because I did not look out the window for some time until I noticed it was mostly dark, and when I did, I expected to be very close to my home. To my horror, I saw we were in some very deserted part of town I had never seen. This area was most certainly not on the way from my friend's house to mine. It should have been a straightforward drive through central London, and this was a very remote area with what looked like an abandoned housing estate and abandoned cars. I looked to the driver to ask where we were, but before I had the chance to say anything, I noticed he was repeatedly looking left and right down the dark alleyways we were going past. And I noticed we were slowing down. I also noticed he was breathing weird, very audibly, like in a sort of pumped, wound up kind of way. And that's when this overwhelming sense of knowing hit me. He was looking for a deserted place to stop. At that point, a very clear voice in my mind told me that he was going to do something very bad and I had to think fast. I blurted out, I don't know where I am. He didn't say anything. I then said the words to the effect of, my friend asked me to call her when I was home safe and I should be home by now, so I need to call her and tell her I'm not home safe, or she will call your firm and call the police because she's over the top like that. That must have jolted him into thinking about the consequences of whatever he was planning to do. These really were the very early days of mobile phones, and not everybody had one of them, especially the older generation. Perhaps it was a lifeline he hadn't considered I might try to use. With that, he turned out of his abandoned area and we came to a main road, and after a while I saw places I recognized and we headed towards my home. He said, "Well, I'm sorry if I made you worried, but there was something weird about the way he said it." And that wasn't the end of it. When we got close to my home, I decided I did not want him dropping me off there. I lived with my sister, but she was staying at her boyfriend's house that night and we lived in a communal block. I was concerned he might be in the main front door and try to get access to my flat. So I said I realized I didn't have milk at home and he could drop me off at the store and on the next street. He had to agree to this, obviously. I entered the store and hung around in there for a bit. I remember being completely broke in those days. My friend paid for the ride via her account. I did have milk at home and certainly wasn't going to buy some unnecessarily. So after a few minutes, I left the store and walked the 3 to 4 minute walk back to my flat. As I approached my flat, it was completely dark by now and the area around my flat was poorly lit. I saw a car parked facing the main door of my flat and I thought, "Oh man, it's him." And I know he would clearly be able to see I had no milk as I didn't even have a bag on me, so he would know I was lying. As I passed the car, I couldn't bring myself to turn to look at him, so I got my keys out, quickened my pace, and entered quickly. Once in my flat, I plucked up the courage to look out the window, and sure enough, it was that guy. He had driven from where he dropped me off to my flat and was sitting in his car staring at my flat. Just then my friend called and I told her I had just gotten home. She couldn't believe how long it had taken, around an hour when it should have been 20 minutes, and I explained the whole thing. As I was on the phone with her, I looked out the window again and he had finally gone. I didn't report any of this at the time, and from my safe vantage point of 20 years down the line, I regret it. But at the same time, I still doubted my gut instinct. Even though I had had this strong sense of knowing in the car, after the event, I convinced myself it was fleeting hysteria and my logical brain returned. My logical brain also told me that if I did report him, nothing could be done because he hadn't actually done anything I could prove, and if he admitted the detour, he could say he took a wrong turn and he would just deny having returned to my flat. But reporting him might cause trouble for him and he knew where I lived, and that scared me more. I was always cautious around my flat after that and thankfully never saw him again. I should have reported it. I know nothing would have been done and I would have probably created a bigger risk to my safety in so doing, but I should have reported it for other people's sake and I regret it. It was the summer of 2006. I was 16 and I had just gotten my driver's license. I lived in a small suburb in South Georgia. It was a small coastal community that rarely ever had crime. The neighborhood I grew up in did not have a community pool, but the neighborhood next to ours did. My mom's friend lived in the adjacent neighborhood and had given us passes to use whenever. One day, my mom was cleaning and asked me to get my brother out of the house to entertain him. He was only 6 at the time, so I thought we could go to the pool and chill for an hour to help my mom. We get to the pool and there's what I assume is another family. Nothing out of the ordinary. When we walk in, I see it's a man with what I assume are his children in the pool. There were a lot of very young kids with him, maybe 5 or 6 kids that ranged in age, but none older than 10. He saw me and immediately stopped playing in the water with the kids so he could watch me. I quickly put my stuff down on a chair from theirs and I tell my brother he can get in the pool. I lie out to sunbathe and this man has not stopped staring. I ignored my gut feeling and thought he wouldn't do anything with all of his kids around. Next thing I know, this man is standing over me with a towel around his waist. He sits next to me and asks me something about my son. He's hard to understand as he had a thick accent and spoke quietly at first. I explained that what he assumed was my son is my brother. I quickly told him my age, hoping there was a misunderstanding and he would leave. He continued to ask me questions about where I lived and if it was close by. Very predatory questions. As I began to answer with a lie, he opened his towel to reveal wet see-through tidy whities with a chub. When I say I saw everything, I mean everything. He grins at me with a smile like a Cheshire cat and begins fondling himself. I immediately grabbed my phone and pretended like I had a phone call from my mom. I grabbed my stuff and snatched my brother out of the pool and then jumped in the car. Before I pulled off, I could see him in my rear view standing there with his hand on his junk. He had followed us to the car. I was crying when I got home and my mom came outside frantic because she could hear how distraught I was. I told her what happened and she called the police. They arrested him. Apparently, the kids he was with were his girlfriends. She came to the pool to try and defend him by saying in his country people swim in underwear. My mom let her have it, she said. Do they also fondle themselves in public in front of minors in this country? You have small children that you let this man watch alone. I was so thankful nothing worse happened, and I hope that woman thinks twice before leaving her kids alone with someone. So this happened about 8 years ago. I lived in a cheap apartment complex. I was studying at the time, so I couldn't afford anything better. With 3 other apartments on my floor, I lived on the 3rd floor. Of these 3 neighbors, I partially knew one guy. He was a young named Christian dude who used to work out at the same gym as I did. But the one living next to me really creeped me out. He was an older grumpy guy who never talked to anybody. Sometimes I watched him searching our trash but never found out what he was looking for or why he did that. One day at around 11 p.m. I heard some loud noises that sounded like somebody was coughing to death at the grumpy man's place. I got up and knocked at his door asking if everything was okay. I heard someone approaching the door. The old dude yelled from behind the door something like, "What the hell do you want?" He had a strong accent, so I barely understood him. I asked him if he needed help or an ambulance as I heard the coughing through the wall. The only thing I got back was, "I'm fine. Will you screw off?" I got annoyed and went back to bed. At least nobody was coughing the rest of the night. After this night, he started watching me through his window every time I went outside to have a smoke. When I got my degree, I moved back in with my parents. Like I said, it was a pretty crappy place, and the guy next to me really started to creep me the heck out, so I just wanted out of there. 3 years later, I met Christian again, who told me that the guy next to me had strangled a prostitute in his apartment, and according to him, hid the body in his closet. He got busted as he tried to dispose of it in the woods near that apartment. He originally came from South Africa, where he sat in prison for 10 years for carjacking and almost killing a person. I often refuse to talk about this because I'm still shivering when I think back to the time I lived in this crappy apartment. I was in my 20s at the time, young and full of ambition. At the time, I was a raging alcoholic and drug addict though, so my memory is kind of hazy, so I do apologize if most details aren't there and major other events are left out. I'm now sober almost a year. Anyways, I moved to Salt Lake City, Utah from Arizona, and I had gotten a job as a service tech. One of these jobs I went on was adding devices for equipment on a string of gas stations starting from St. George to Salt Lake, slowly working my way up the state to Salt Lake City, hitting every store that was needing devices. I cannot remember exactly where I was for the life of me, somewhere between Richfield and another town, one of those small towns in between. I'd finished at the store late, about 10 to 11 p.m. or so, and wanted to get to the next town over so I could continue my work in the morning rather than drive the 2 hours in the morning. As I'm driving down the highway, Google Maps has told me to take this dirt road to get to the town I was working in next. Hesitant on why this was a route, turned left into it. A long dirt road with nothing around me. Pitch black darkness other than my high beams. Maybe 5 to 7 minutes into my drive, my truck makes a sputter. It was an old 2008 work truck. I cursed under my breath and put it in park. I lifted the hood and nothing seemed to be wrong. I have mild mechanic knowledge. Of course, I looked down at my phone and see I had no cell service at all. I checked my work phone and it's the same thing. My only option here was to pretty much either wait it out until daytime or find a spot where I could get a bar of service. So I took option 2. Also, I usually carry firearms, but this trip I had forgotten to bring it with me. Wielding a 10-inch pipe wrench and a Milwaukee flashlight, I walked into the desert determined to be rescued from the dark abyss. I'd like to add that this road was barely paved. I mean, you would not even take a truck on this, unless you had to or it led to a specific point. And I wouldn't even call it a road to be honest, more of a trail. Brush and trees lined up the trail like a natural wall. I'm not anxious or get scared very easily. I grew up in Arizona, so I was pretty used to the dark, quiet desert. Every step further from the truck made me feel more tense though. I walked for about 10 minutes until I heard laughing. Kind of muffled laughing. Something you would hear out of a kid's show. Right behind me, I swung around quickly. Nothing. My boots are sinking into the mounds of sand as I quickly just keep pushing forward. My heart is beating out of my chest like a ticking time bomb. I hear it again, but closer, louder, like if it were 4 to 5 feet from me. I'm fully sprinting into the desert brush and sand now, eyes darting like lasers around for somewhere to hide. I do not believe in the paranormal or aliens or anything like that. I just figured it was some deranged desert hobo or something. Or some sort of drug addict. The adrenaline coursing through me. I hid behind a rock that was nearby. Crouched down, my right knee hurting from all of the rocks on the ground. But I didn't care. I needed to hide. The rocks were one of those 3-footish mound rocks. The moon was shining bright so I could see some things. As I am scanning the desert, I see silhouettes of 2 people running. I can barely make them out, but my eyes have them adjusted to the dark abyss. I forgot to mention after a while of this running, I turned my flashlight off to not give away my location. I hear them talking, but I'm far enough away to not be able to understand what they're saying. I literally sent out a message to my family and friends saying that I love them and that I'm sorry for anything I'd done wrong in my life. They didn't even send because I didn't have any service, just coping with the traumatic event. I'm not a small guy, by the way. 5'10" and 230 pounds, but I was unarmed and outnumbered. And who knows how many others were out there with them and what they were planning on doing when I was found and helpless. I waited, but they did not leave the general direction of where they were at. Scrambling around like mosquitoes, I had the thought of the only thing I could do. I grabbed 2 small rocks. I'm not religious, but I tried praying to God that night and threw them far in a direction away from the truck and the road. I heard them scurry away toward the noise, shouting at each other as they trucked through the desert. I slowly crouch walked through the brush back to the truck. I forgot to mention this earlier, but I heard another set of stomping after the 2 had run. There were 3 confirmed people in the desert with me. As I got closer, I could see the truck. I felt like I was in heaven. Every step was closer to salvation. My boots filled with sand with every stomp into the soft, cold sand. Branches and brushes stabbed me into my cargo work pants. I hear them tailing me. I could not turn around. I did not care to see who it was or what it was chasing me. I see the truck. The truck driver's side door is completely open. I had left it closed. I checked the back seat and flung the door open more. Flew into the driver's seat in the truck and did the most stupid thing ever, but it was the only thing I could think of. I started it. It took a couple of tries to start it, but it cranked and let out a roar. I threw the gear shifter and drove. As I was driving, hauling ass down this dirt road, I saw hooded people hiding along the sides of the road, ducking as I drove by, scattering into the darkness like roaches in a kitchen. I rolled down the window and chucked my pipe wrench as hard as I could right at one of them and sped off. I watched it do flips right into where they were. I yelled as I sped off into the pitch-dark desert night. Trails of dust followed the truck as it drove. Silence. Nothing but me and my heavy breathing trying to make sense of the whole situation. I drove until I seen town lights. I was sweating, white knuckles on the steering wheel, gritting my teeth, going at least 75 miles per hour. I got into the small town at around 12 a.m., threw myself into a local 7-Eleven looking terrified. The cashier asked me what was wrong, and I just asked her to call the sheriff's office. The sheriff was some old burly looking man. I'm covered in tattoos, head to toe, so he treated me almost as a criminal myself. LOL. Turns out, some hose had burst. Do not remember exactly what it was. I got into town and called my boss, who was upset at the late night call he was receiving. He was shocked at what I said and said to call the sheriff's office and mechanic. Mechanic guy was super nice and didn't charge me for the repair. The cops weren't much help though. They basically looked at me like I'd been up too long and I was hallucinating. I was not, and had asked me if I'd taken drugs or had drunk and barely wrote anything on the report. The mechanic was telling me that he had never heard of something like that in the area. I stayed in a motel that night. I believe it was a Motel 6, but I can't remember. I swear I didn't get a lick of sleep that night after I showered the dirt off of me. I ended up returning home early and quit this job later down the line for other reasons. I have since moved out of Utah to Florida. A photo I had taken on the service call came and reminded me of this story. I had to write about it, and I had to tell someone. Was this a robbery? Were they trying to hurt me? Did they see the work truck and say, expensive tools and copper? I have no idea. I'm just curious. Who do you think these people were, and why were they hunting me like an animal? Has anyone had a similar experience before? How close do you think I was to being murdered in the desert? Edits. The truck was looted. I remember all the wire, pipe, and some power tools were taken. We humans are not afraid of being alone in the dark, but of finding someone else in the dark with us. This took place when I was around 7 or 8, so my brother must have been 12 or 13 when this happened. Since my brother was now considered a teenager, my dad figured it would be safe to stop asking my grandma to pick my brother and me up after school because he couldn't since he was working. He was an extremely hard-working single father. Anyways, so my brother and I started walking home alone after school, after getting off of the bus. It was like a 2-minute walk back to our place from the bus stop. Shortly after, a middle-aged man with the creepiest vibes started showing up across the street from our house, and he would just stare. Mainly, he wore this beat-up, extremely dirty and vibrant jumpsuit. Like, very vibrant. The only reason I saw him was because of that jumpsuit that looked like it belonged to the 80s. He wouldn't do anything. He would just stare at our house from across the street. He would usually appear 5 minutes after we got home, then leave maybe 5 to 10 minutes before my dad got home. At first, I thought he was just a strange new neighbor. It wasn't uncommon in my area for creepy old men, or pedophilic construction workers and drunk college students to lurk around town. It was about all my dad could afford at the time. After a while, though, I got a bad feeling that he wasn't a neighbor. He grew somewhat ballsy. At this point, he had openly been observing us for about half a year. It soon escalated from him just staring at us when we got home to him physically waiting at my brother's and my bus stop. 1. I already hated going home after school. And 2. This creep is now practically making this unavoidable. I was a bundle of nerves, and so was my brother when we got off the bus and saw the guy standing there staring at us. I immediately grabbed my brother's hand and started fast walking home. I hated hearing his footsteps lurk behind us. My scaredy cat-o-meter was finally so damn off the charts that I was begging my brother to call the police. Instead, he grabbed the metal baseball bat that was next to the door and told me that if anyone, besides our dad, walked through that door, he would kill them. I was so mad at him for weeks after that, but looking back now, I kind of extremely admire my prepubescent brother, who would be willing to do anything to protect his little sister. That night, we finally told our dad about our daily evening visitor. He was furious, but also sad that his kids didn't tell him sooner. We felt like it was somehow our fault that this man was following us, so we figured that my brother and I would get in trouble for the man's actions. A creepy man had been stalking his kids for nearly a year without his knowledge. He was devastated. I sympathize with him now. My dad talked to a woman who waited at the bus stop for her son and explained the situation to her. She had thought that the man was someone that he asked to watch us since she noticed our grandma no longer picked us up. After my dad talked to the woman, my brother and I never saw our stalker again. Years later, I found out that the woman, while waiting for her son to get dropped off by the bus, noticed the creep in the same jumpsuit and the same toque. She walked right up to his face and told him, "If you don't leave those poor kids alone, I won't even call the cops. I'll take matters into my own hands and beat the living heck out of you. I never want to see your face around here again." She was a tough, mean-looking lady, but a huge softie with the biggest heart ever. Anyways, she was mean enough looking that the guy never lurked outside our home or bus stop again. Not sure if this would serve as any significance to you guys, but my upstairs neighbor later claimed that they used to see him go dumpster diving down the street from our home. I met Austin in the fall of 2024 via a message he had sent me over Facebook. I was lonely, really lonely. I had just moved to a new city with very few friends because I transferred from community college to university, so I gave him a chance. I messaged him back and we began chatting. We had a mutual friend, so I thought nothing of it. Maybe she told him about me. Maybe he had seen me in passing. Time began to pass and we got much closer. Soon, I met him in person for a date. After this date, things began to move very fast. We hung out all the time and stayed at each other's places almost constantly. He was very sweet at first, and I was so excited to be around someone I believed was so genuinely kind. Fast forward a couple of months and I moved into his apartment. It was a bad idea, I know, but my current living situation was growing increasingly more toxic as I was living with 6 other girls. This was when things began to go downhill though. He introduced me to his daughter Lily. She was so sweet and I adored her. He didn't get to see her much, as he would tell me his baby mama was insane and keeping her away from him to control him. As I got to know him more, he began to grow more violent towards me. It started with small things like yelling at me over misplacing a phone charger or not putting something where he thought it belonged. As time began to pass, the instances of his anger increased and became more dramatic. He would scream at me almost every day. It was always my fault if he lost his keys, if I was home from work later than expected because he needed childcare, or if I went to visit family or friends. It didn't matter what the situation was. Everything was my fault. In addition to this, he was serially cheating on me, as I would find out later. Not only that, but somewhere with minors. Some more time passed and we moved to a much larger apartment in a different suburb of our city. Things were well for a while and I still remained oblivious to his horrible internet activity. After a very late night at work, he wakes me up and shows me a tiny little kitten. "I found her at work and brought her home for you," he whispered to me. I named her Stripe, and she was my soul cat. I and this little kitten did absolutely everything together. About a month passes and I come home from work pretty late in the evening as I was a server at the bar. He was infuriated at me as he needed childcare so he could go to work. On top of that, he lost his keys and it was also my fault. He screamed in my face, called me names, and began to escalate the situation while I just sat there with tears rolling down my face. At some point in his anger, he grabs Stripe and throws her against the bathroom floor because she quote-unquote bit him. She weighed less than 3 pounds and it wouldn't have hurt. She began to have a seizure and died in my arms on the way to the emergency vet as I gave her CPR. He had just killed my kitten in cold blood. For more context, he also had a dog named Cookie that he beat to the point of seizures. I'm glad to be able to say that I kept this dog and did not allow him to have the dog back again. I felt so trapped. I had no friends to reach out to and no family I felt safe staying with. I was isolated with a very dangerous man. I feared walking in the door. I feared leaving the house. I feared him. I was actually very depressed, and I couldn't afford the rent alone, as he was spending my money on top of his money. I had nowhere to go and no one to help. More time passes. August 2025, and I uncover his internet activity because one of the girls he was talking to messaged me. That was the final straw for me, so I broke up with him. We still lived in the same space, however. He was in the bedroom for his daughter, and I was in my own room. Fast forward to November of 2025, and he verbally assaulted me, saying absolutely nasty things. This escalated to him trying to choke me, throwing me all around the house and being physical to the point I actually feared for my life. I tried to leave and he wouldn't let me. He tried to take my animals and let them out somewhere. He tried to hold a gun to me. It was scary. I couldn't call the cops though. They would have booked us both, and I had finals the next day and was scared to fail all of my classes as I could not afford to repeat them. At some point, I do decide to take the risk to call the cops, but he breaks my phone by snapping it in half. I decide to run for my life and he forcibly took my house key, but I had my car keys so I ran. I drove until I got to my father's house and fell asleep on his couch. From this point, he would not leave me alone. With over 100 calls and text messages per day, going from kind to abusive almost every 2 messages. I move in with my very distant mom and take my animals somewhere safe. I pleaded with him to leave my apartment because he wasn't on the lease, but he repeatedly refused as he wanted to fix our family. I began to settle in at my mom's house and see people that I know reconnecting with old friends. As time passes, so do the holidays. I get over 50 calls on Thanksgiving, 100 on Christmas and New Year's. He was still threatening me and harassing me, and I remained at my mother's. I finally convinced him to leave my apartment, threatening a CPO, hoping that he would leave me alone and I wouldn't have to go through with it because I was scared of it being denied. I finally convinced him to leave my apartment, threatening a restraining order, hoping that he would leave me alone and I wouldn't have to go through with it because I was actually terrified of it being denied. On January 10th, I get to move back to my apartment and it was trashed. I spent 2 weeks working to put the pieces back together and resume some form of my life. I had within the past couple of months started seeing someone long distance casually. He was lovely and offered to help me clean up all the pieces of my life, which was not something he had to do. My ex still harassed me from his number as well as from fake numbers, posing as a stalker threatening my life. He posed as a different person in some of the texts saying he was going to get me. In February, I couldn't take it anymore. I filed a restraining order and was granted an ex parte based on my testimony. I was still getting texts from the fake numbers threatening me, saying that they knew where I was and what I was doing. After the court hearing it all stopped, it was finally silent and I was finally safe. He still tries to find ways to mess with me, like giving people my number, saying I'm easy, or making posts that relate to me and my friends telling me they've seen something weird. He tried to get family to reach out to me and they wouldn't. Now I'm happy. I'm seeing my childhood best friend and we're in love. He's so kind and exactly what I need. I feel safe. But I still look behind my back all the time to see if somebody is following me. I still get texts from numbers asking if I'm easy, then telling me they got my number from Austin. I still need to seek therapy, and I still need to file a report of him violating his restraining order. But overall, I'm happy now. So, let's not meet again, Austin. I hope you get what you deserve, which is nothing. I'm an 18-year-old female living in a small town in Michigan. When this incident took place, I had been working a few hours a week in a small pizzeria. It was in my town, and I had been working there for about a year when my boss decided to go on vacation. She and her family lived in an apartment below the restaurant, and 2 other apartments were overhead. In order to get into these apartments, you had to go to the back of the building and down a sketchy set of stairs or the grass slope where you would find her door and the stairs leading up to the apartments above. Beyond that is a yard and then some woods. I think it's important to mention that there was absolutely no reason to be behind the restaurant unless you were trying to enter the apartments. Now, I usually worked with my mom because we got stuff done easily and I hated answering phones. One night my mom was feeling ill, so I had to work with another lady. She was very sweet but not very efficient, so I was working hard to keep up and getting a bit agitated when she told me that we needed Parmesan. I agreed to go get it from the store just down the road if she promised to not make me answer phones for the rest of our shift. There were only about 2 hours left, which were normally pretty slow, so I guess it didn't matter that much anyways. As I was getting in my SUV, I saw a guy pull into the small parking lot with a beat-up car and park near the back. He was lanky and wearing oil-stained shop clothes, which was and still is totally normal around here. He got out and retrieved a bag from his trunk and headed down the slope. I know this guy wasn't a renter because I'd never seen him before, and the renters frequently ordered pizza. It was possible he was a friend of one of the renters, but that didn't seem right. It was 9:30 at night, and one renter was a single mom, and the others were 2 brothers with mental health issues that were pretty antisocial. I was getting bad vibes, so I grabbed my knife from the center console and tucked it up my sleeve. Call me paranoid, but there'd been a lot of car fires and break-ins around the time, so I was nervous to go anywhere unarmed. It might have been a stupid thing to do, but I considered my boss a friend and didn't want this guy to hurt any of the renters or steal from any of the apartments. I decided to go see what he was doing, just in case he had any ill intentions. I got out of my car and walked quietly to the slope. There were motion activated lights so I could easily see what he was doing. He was fiddling with an old key ring and trying to get into my boss's apartment. "What are you doing?" I asked loudly so that my coworker could hopefully hear me through the open back door. He was startled but smiled and told me he worked for my boss's husband and he was there to feed the dog and let it out. His smile was creepy, the kind that a liar gives when they're trying really hard to convince you. My boss did have a dog and her husband did own a fabrication shop, so his story seemed to check out, but I still was not convinced. I decided to go get the cheese and check again when I get back. "Okay, let me know if you need help with anything." I tried to sound as normal as possible, but I was seriously creeped out. I hustled at the store and went back to work. I'd been gone for only 15 minutes when I got back, and surprisingly, he'd already gone. I was still feeling suspicious and bad for the dog who'd been shut in for a good portion of the day, so I decided to text my boss when I got out of work. Fast forward 2 hours, and I was on my way home. I got to my door when I decided to check Facebook. As I was scrolling, I saw something that made my stomach drop. It was a picture of my boss with her dog on the beach from earlier that day. I called my boss and then the police to make a report. It turned out the guy had been fired by my boss's husband earlier that week for making an inappropriate comment about his 19-year-old daughter and repeatedly harassing other female staff. This guy had planned some sort of revenge scheme but didn't know they had left for vacation. His bag was full of tools and a couple of knives. During questioning, he told them that the only reason he left was because he thought I was watching him. Thankfully, he went to jail for that and a couple other things that he'd been wanted for previously. This still creeps me out to this day, and I hate to think what could have happened if they had been home. This was 10 years ago. Let me start by saying I was, and sometimes still am, a horrible people pleaser. It was much worse then, and I would regularly go against my own judgment and gut feeling for fear of seeming rude or disagreeable. A 28 female was 18. Just moved 3 hours from home to a major city to go to college. I had just, a week beforehand, ended my long-term relationship because I was starting to see how emotionally and physically abusive he was. I was playing around on Facebook in my dorm room and got a friend request and message from a guy I didn't recognize. The message said something like he'd seen me around campus a few times, joked about similar schedules, blah blah blah, and ended with him asking me to go out with him to see a movie. I read the message and ignored it and the friend request. I joked about it later to roommates who managed to convince me that I was somehow being a jerk by not at least agreeing to meet up with him for a coffee or something. They tossed "it'd be good for you to get out into the dating world again, because you're young and in college, have some fun." So I let this eat me up inside until I convinced myself that getting coffee down the block at Starbucks, very public 100 yards from my dorm, would be a safe way to not be rude to this complete stranger. I let him know via Facebook and we make plans for a coffee a few days later. Fast forward to the coffee date. I walk down to Starbucks to meet him, and he's standing outside a very closed Starbucks. My mind is already reeling. What do I do now? I'm here. It'd be very rude to just go home because I'd imply that he scares me and I don't want to be alone with him. All of which were accurate though. He starts joking about Starbucks being closed and offers to drive us to a movie. I politely declined, making excuses about money and insisted I was uncomfortable letting him pay for me. He suggested a bar on campus. It was more of a student hangout kind of deal, but they served alcohol. I jumped on that because it was a public place, walking distance, and students and professors would be there. He tries to insist on driving, but I am adamant that we walk. It's a nice night and garbage like that. We start walking over there, and the conversation just starts getting more and more bizarre and making me really uncomfortable. He starts asking me if I'm okay with him being Indian and if I've ever been with an Indian guy before, saying that most girls didn't seem to want to date Indian guys. I answer questions but otherwise don't really involve myself in the conversation. He was fine with that because apparently he had enough to say for both of us. We finally get to where he can see the bar and it's closed. I start really looking around and notice that there are not very many people around. Maybe one or two running across the green and a biker here and there, but all pretty far off. I am beyond uncomfortable and trying to come up with a polite excuse to get myself home as quickly as possible. He starts to walk toward the bay and back by the big docks. I know the area well enough, my friend. I used to like to hang out back there to watch the water and smoke because there's never any people there. I'm panicking internally, but mentally, I can't justify turning tail and running because he hasn't actually done anything to warrant that response yet. So I just follow behind. He continues on his rant about women and Indian men getting angrier and angrier by the minute. You probably think I'm ugly, don't you? White women always hate Indian men. You were all stuck up, he said. You think you're so much better than me. Even Indian women don't want to date me, he said. They would rather be with a white guy with less body hair. That's why you don't ever try to talk to me when I see you running back and forth to class. At this point, he stopped walking and is just pacing and yelling. I'm terrified but trying to stay calm and use all of my talking skills to talk him down. I can't put into words how hateful and full of blind rage his tone was. My back is to the bay and only a few feet from the water. I'm trying to move myself casually to where he's closer to the water and I'm closer to my escape, should I need to run. Fight or flight is going full blast, and at this point, I think running is going to make me angrier and I won't get very far. I start telling him I agree with him, how women are awful and shallow and they should give him a chance. Anything I can come up with because I honestly thought he was going to take all of his rage at the female gender out on me. That they would find my body floating in the bay tomorrow morning. By some miracle, it worked. He calmed down and started telling me I was different than the other girls. I just kept up the same routine. I started walking back towards my dorm slowly, like you would with a friend just casually trying to get moving again. It worked. He walked with me back to my dorm building. I tried to convince him there was no need, that I could walk myself back, but he said he was worried I could run into some creep if I was by myself. There was only one building for the whole campus, and he already saw me leave it, so damage was already done there. He asked if he could come inside with me to my room. I lied and said I couldn't have guests after 9, and booked it inside. I hid in the front lobby watching to see if he hung around outside or left right away. Thankfully, he left. I briefly explained to the RA what happened and that he should not ever be let into the building no matter what. The only door that could get inside the building was that one, and it needed a key card to get in. I went back up to my room, blocked him on Facebook, and then for added measure ended up disabling my account for a while. I also went back home with my mom that weekend and bought some pepper spray. This is going to be a long one since I've never managed to really put the whole story together until now. This happened in a relatively small town and city in Canada in April of 2016, right before I graduated high school. I was 17 at the time. It was my grad year and most of the people in my grad class were partying and planning activities to celebrate our upcoming graduation. One of the traditions in my town is to play a grid game called Rainbow, which is basically a version of Predator-Prey. A bunch of people would meet up at a location on one side of the city, and the goal was for the runners to make it to a spot on the other side of the city without getting caught by the seekers, which were groups of 3 to 4 in their cars. Runners also went in groups of 3 to 4, but they had to be on foot. My grad class was around 200 people, and I would say this particular night, there were about 60 to 70 people playing. This takes place after it's completely dark outside. It was probably around 11 p.m. that night. I had planned to be a runner in a group of 4 with my boyfriend at the time, as well as my friend and her boyfriend. However, my now ex-boyfriend bailed last minute to go do drugs at a different party with his friends, which left me as a third wheel with my friend and her man. No problem, right? I should have never gone. Now for reference, I am tiny. Like 4'11" tiny, and weighed around 80 pounds at the time. I genuinely look like I am around 13 if I don't wear makeup and you don't get a good look at me. Anyways, my friend and I got all dressed up in all black and put war paint on our cheeks, and the 3 of us headed to the spot. I live in what I've always considered a safe town, mostly full of families or retired people. There are only a few bad-ish neighborhoods in this city. The game started and we all ran, and all was fun up until about an hour, in midnight. We had to cross through one of said neighborhoods. While we were walking along a residential street sidewalk, one of the seeker cars came ripping down the street and the three of us ran. Of course, my friend and her man stayed together and I got separated somehow in the scuffle. Once the seekers weren't in the immediate area, I started calling out to my friends and could hear their voices somewhere in the distance. I texted my friend and she said they were in the alley on the other side of the houses, while I was still on the sidewalk in front. I had two options. I could walk to the end of the block and find the alley that way, but I was about 20 houses away in either direction and I knew for a fact that there were seekers nearby who had seen us and knew we were in the area. My other option was to cut through someone's yard and immediately be in the alley and reunite with my group. I chose the latter. Why I did this, I will never know. Like I said, I am a tiny girl and this was known to be a rough neighborhood. I looked at the nearest houses and spotted one that didn't have a front gate. His lawn went straight into the backyard, save for a few shrubs on the side of the house. I thought this meant that I could go straight through and that there wouldn't be a back fence. I chose this house and stepped over the shrubs and jogged towards the back. As I did, a motion light came on that illuminated the backyard. This scared me, but I was already in, so I figured I would just get out as fast as possible. When the light came on, however, I noticed that there was in fact a fence, and about a 6 to 7 foot tall one at that. I certainly couldn't jump it, but there was a gate with a latch that I ran to. I remember having to stand on my tippy toes to even reach the latch. While fumbling with it, I heard a noise. It was the sound of the back door of the house opening. The houses in this area were quite small and often dilapidated. I would say that the back door was only around 15 feet from the fence. It had some concrete stairs with wrought iron railings. I remember turning my head towards the noise and having around 1 second to see this gigantic bald man in his stained white briefs charging at me from the store. Probably 6'5" and, I don't know, maybe 300 pounds. He hit me like a freight train, slammed into me so that I hit the fence hard. I think he came at me with his hands at neck height, but I can't remember for sure. What I do remember though vividly was how he picked me up, my full body weight by my neck. I remember trying to shriek and hearing my own voice barely choking out a sound. He immediately started towards the door that he came from. As he dragged me towards his house, I remember being sure that something horrific was going to happen to me and that I was going to die. I remember his hairy, sweaty body absorbing my kicks in attempts to hit him. I was trying to scream the whole time, but both his hands around my neck were an unescapable, silencing death trap. Right in front of his steps, my iPhone flew out of my hoodie pocket and hit the concrete, reminding me of its existence altogether. But now it was sitting on the ground as he hauled me off the stairs. I still don't know how I mustered the strength, but that wrought iron railing gave me something to finally leverage myself against. I managed to pull myself away from his grasp, using that fence, just long enough to grab my phone. His hand slipped off my neck, but caught my hoodie's neckline, which tore to my sternum. I was wearing another shirt underneath. The hoodie is still the grim reminder of this day. For some reason, I can't throw it away. Now, he immediately caught me again, but in my mind, I was for sure going to die if I didn't have my phone to somehow call for help. But being out of his grasp allowed for another thing. I could scream. I knew my friends were somewhere in the back alley, and I screamed bloody murder at the top of my lungs once I could. He caught me again and dragged me into his house, and I vaguely remember him trying to cover my mouth or grab my throat again, but I'm not sure. Upon entering his house, I saw where he was taking me. The steps into his pitch-black basement were only about 4 feet from his back door, and he was headed straight for it. I was certain that I was going to be dragged into his rape/murder dungeon, and nobody would ever see me again. This freak had 1 foot down the stairs when he heard it. Before his back door fully shut, there came a sound from outside that I believe saved my life. It was my friend calling my name. They heard me screaming and were very close to the yard I was in, so naturally, they started freaking out and calling my name. And this guy heard them, and he froze in his tracks, eyes fixed out the back door now. He realized I wasn't alone. All at once he let go of me and stepped in front of the door, blocking my escape back through it. But then he started asking me all sorts of questions like he was in a frenzy. Why were you in my yard? You were stealing and vandalizing, weren't you? I was pretty messed up, but starting to explain the game I was playing, referring heavily to the fact that I was with a group of friends and was just trying to cut through his yard. I was, now that I got a good look at him, completely naked aside from some stained saggy white briefs. After about 30 seconds, my friend called my phone and I have never picked up a call so fast. I immediately started yelling at her that I'm in someone's house and he's trying to kidnap me, what the house looked like and stuff. I stayed back from him and stayed on the phone with my friend while he was screaming at me that he performed a civilian's arrest because I was vandalizing his property. He repeatedly threatened to call the police, to which I said, please do, every time. The police would get me out of this house. He never did call them, but he made me write my name on a piece of paper, which I did because I just wanted him to let me go. He kept me in his house, seemingly trying to figure out what to do. Until around 2 minutes later, there was violent banging at the front door. My friends had found his house and were just going to town on this guy's door. Then he finally let me go back out the back door. I promptly threw up on his front lawn from nerves as soon as I was reunited with my friends. My gift to him. You could stop listening here. The rest is what happened after. Disclaimer, I understand that I was trespassing, but I was not stealing or vandalizing. What he did, I believe to be assault and unlawful confinement, not a civilian's arrest. And may I remind you that I am under 5 feet tall, standing on my little tippy toes to reach the gate, my long blonde hair hanging down my back. He knew I was a little girl, and I don't believe for a second that he truly thought I was a threat to his property. I will never forget the way he stepped 1 foot to that basement. So it goes. Aftermath. Later, I had some bruises on my neck. My hair was coming out in clumps from where it had been ripped out during the struggle, and I was missing many of my piercings, including my belly ring somehow. From the sheer violence of the altercation, I told my parents and whatnot about it and went to bed that night. I don't think I slept. The next morning, my mom convinced me to go to the police. At the time, I remember wanting to just hide somewhere safe for the rest of eternity, but my mom convinced me that he can't just get away with what he did to me. I went to the police station where I had to wait around an hour to speak with a constable. Because I live in a smaller town, there aren't a lot of cops on duty on a Sunday, and the cop I would talk to was currently on another call. What we didn't know at the time was that my dad was the reason the cops were busy. Now, my dad kind of looks like a freak. He looks like a long-haired biker and drives old vintage cars with ported exhaust. So they're as loud as a Harley. He was angry. He pulled up at this guy's house and apparently stood and stared in his front window for a long time. Then he headed to the back alley and did the same. I learned that this guy had multitudes of security cameras all over his house, and my dad apparently stared into one in the back for upwards of 8 minutes without moving. The guy called the cops on my dad, who left just as they showed up. This guy then gave a statement to the cops before I got there, claiming that I had been vandalizing his property and was sending people to further mess with his house. Of course, he had no evidence of vandalism, and only my dad being freaky as evidence that anyone was going to mess with it. He told the officers they did not have footage of the altercation, which I think is BS. He just didn't want them to see him attacking me and dragging me into his house. The same cops came back to the station where I was waiting, and before I got to give any statement, they described my dad to me and asked if I knew him. I told them it was my dad, and they said, "We don't know who you're affiliated with, but you need to leave this man alone." I remember being taken aback by this because here I was to give my statement, and they'd already decided this guy was the victim of the situation. I was pretty shell-shocked, and trying to tell the story was clearly tricky for me. The cop hardly wrote anything down, and then he basically threw the book at me. He told me, "You were the one trespassing. Do you understand that Mr. X could press charges on you?" I was flabbergasted. I had literally been attacked and had bruises on my neck, a torn sweater, and hair falling out in clumps as evidence, and the cop said I was the criminal. This scared me because I had ambitions for the future that could not include any kind of record. This shut me up. I agreed to let it go and left the situation. In hindsight, I think the cops really didn't want to deal with the situation and just wanted it to go away. They succeeded. For a few years, I was terrified of seeing this man again, and was convinced he was going to eventually show up at the post office I worked at, since his neighborhood was in my outlet's jurisdiction, but I never did. My dad continued to drive very slowly past his house from time to time, including the alley, and even got one of his actual biker friends to park right out front and smoke a cigarette while looking over at the house. The cops showed up on him, but it's not illegal to pull over and have a smoke. I like to think this guy lived in fear that the Hells Angels were after him, at least for a while. I coped by convincing myself that this was his messed up idea of a citizen's arrest and that he wasn't trying to kidnap me. But telling the story reminds me that may have not been the case. I've never told this story in full before, so if you made it this far, thanks for reading. This happened to me last Friday. I'm currently in my senior year of college. I have some pretty decent scores, but I want to make a stellar statement of purpose before applying to my dream school. For an MS in computational biology. Fingers crossed, guys. As both my younger sister and I are currently home from school on winter break, and she may be possibly the loudest person to ever exist, I typically sequester myself away in the library with a large Duncan. This is needed. My strong suit lies in mathematics and not writing, so I need all of the brain power I can get. You might be saying, what is she doing on Reddit? Write your essay. But I need a break or I will go crazy, guys. I get to the library and head to my normal spot, which nobody seems to know about. Second floor tucked in the corner. Good Wi-Fi, near a cozy heater. No windows to distract me with an enticing view. Except there's somebody sitting at my table. I mutter a sorry and turn to walk away. This man stops me, claiming I can share his table. There didn't seem to be a lot of open spots downstairs, so I accepted. About 30 minutes of silence later, he asks what I'm so intently working on. I explain. He chuckles and says, "A girl with a brain. You shouldn't be wasting all of your time at school, though. You're too pretty." Which, ew. I don't really feel like debating this, so I just awkwardly laugh. He goes on to explain how if he had a woman who was so smart, he would never let her leave the house, or fear she might discover something better. I ignore this. He then says something really weird. Has anyone ever told you look like Dag? Huh? What do you mean? I ask. The Dag, from Mad Max. It takes me a few seconds to process this. I have honestly had a couple of friends text me after seeing the movie and tell me they see some resemblance, but I'm not going to participate in this conversation. No. Short, blunt, and to the point. We continue on in silence. At this point, I've chalked the afternoon up as a loss. My concentration is shot to shit, and I won't be able to focus anymore with this creep here. I fake a phone call because society tells me to be polite, and I still have trouble not doing so. Huh. How funny. My mom needs me to come home in the middle of the day. I gather my stuff and nod to the man. Walk to the car and curse when I realize I left my flash drive on the table. Worried the guy might have taken it, I rush back, and the flash drive is there, but he's gone. Weird. Well, if he's gone and my table is open, I guess I'll stay. 5 minutes later, I'm all but engrossed back at my work. Here's something important. Not being able to find any hair ties. Seriously, where did they go? I simply stuck my hair up on my head with a big old claw clip. So there's me typing on my laptop, when I suddenly feel my hair tumble down my head, and a hand squeezes it. I turn around to see the man who doesn't let my hair go. I could start a set with you, he mutters, a sickening grin on his face. Friends, if you need to scream bloody murder and want to make sure you're heard, a library is a very good place to do it. I don't think, just screamed. About 10 patrons and a librarian came running up. I instantly started crying, only to have the man say, "My girlfriend and I got in a fight." The security guard separated us, and upon hearing my side of the story, the man was kicked out of the library. The guard took me to my car. Still really freaked out about this one, but I'll get over it. So I'm on my school netball team, and we have practice every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday. My town is quite small and I live literally on the outskirts of the town. I have a 20-minute bike ride to and from school and live on a country road. That's also quite long with only about 4 other houses, so when I finish practice, I go the opposite way home to all my friends who live near the town center. Since last week, Tuesday, we've been practicing till around 8:30 p.m. for our upcoming game this Saturday, with the girls' school on the other side of town from us. Because it's so late, most of the girls on our team have their parents pick them up, but for me, I just get on my bike and go home. So it was Tuesday, last week, when we were coming out of the changing rooms and going onto the court when I noticed this guy sitting on a bench down the hall, just watching me and my friends go in. I figured that he was a parent or something, so I just ignored him, but he looked pretty creepy. He had a greasy beard and receding long hair, a big double chin and glasses. Your textbook creep. My friend Rachel saw him too, so we asked a couple of girls when we went into the court if they knew him, but none of us did. Still, I just ignored him and continued on playing. He was there on Wednesday too. He sat on the same bench in the hall, looking at us coming out into the gym court. Rachel said that she was finding him a bit weird, and I agreed, so we told our coach, and she came out and told him to leave. I didn't see what happened, but she told us he's gone, so I didn't worry about it. On Friday, he wasn't there when we came into the court, but our coach told us to all sit down for a moment. When we sat down, she told us that parents from our school had been complaining about a man loitering around the school and trying to talk to the 9th and 10th graders, which is my year and the year above. I knew it was probably him, and she looked at me and Rachel while speaking, which I think confirmed it. She told us all, though, to just take safety precautions and try to get all of our parents to pick us up. I called my mom after practice, so she canceled work and picked me up. Yesterday, we were moved to the other court on the other side of the fitness center, closer to the factories and less quiet back streets behind, so the boys' basketball team could play a game or something. The guy wasn't there because the changing rooms aren't connected to a hallway in that part, but I was still pretty nervous because my mom said she couldn't pick me up. Practice went as normal and we all left through the back. I got my bike and said bye to Rachel and my other friends, put in my earphones, got my bike, and was about to get on my bike when the guy comes out of a doorway down the back. I start panicking. My friends must have walked a block by now to the front where their parents are waiting. If I get on my bike now, I'll reach them, I thought. He walks forward, and in the street light, I see scissors in his hand. "Please, can I have some hair?" he said. I was frozen still, shaking, thinking these are my last moments, so I just scream as loud as I can. I completely throw him off guard, and he drops the scissors and runs like nobody's business down the alley. Carly, this girl on my team, runs down with her mom, and I tell them what happened. When they take me back inside, I find my coach and tell her he came back, and they all stay with me and comfort me. But I just want to go home, so my coach drives me in her pickup truck. I call my mom at home, but she tells me he must have been just ill mentally. And I shouldn't have been scared, as he probably wouldn't have hurt me. I guess she's right, but scary creepy guy, let's not meet. At least we won't this week, because I'll be missing today and Friday's practice sessions. I have Arnold-Chiari malformation, so I usually like to keep it quiet and not be the loud one in my group of friends, as it causes me extreme headaches, almost to the point of passing out because of the pain and also dizziness. But one particular day, my friends had convinced me to just take a lot of ibuprofen to counteract it beforehand, so that's what I did. We had all decided to go to a large spring, which is used by the locals for swimming since it's pretty deep. Our whole group decided on a little friendly competition to swim from one side to the other, just for shits and giggles. I wish it would have remained so lighthearted. Me being the person I was, I took swimming lessons for 11 years and was on major swim teams in my county. I made it first and was flaunting it by waving to the rest of our group, who were only still halfway across, even though the most athletic of us were only 2/3 of the way there. Anyways, as I waited, it was a very forestry natural place, with vegetation covering up almost anything, so it was unlikely my group saw me at this point after I stopped waving and boasting. I felt the presence behind me, but before I could turn around, a male hand grasped my mouth and pulled me down so that I was sitting on him. The position resembled how a grandfather would hold his granddaughter on his lap, but much more sinister and forceful. I tried to kick and scream, but my strength was slowed a lot from the amount of ibuprofen I took to counteract my hihari. He had a rusty box cutter and it was resting dangerously on my throat. As I was struggling, he pulled my face closer to his and said, "I could kill you right now and I would enjoy every minute of it." I was still forced onto his lap and he was strangely petting my hair like a small child. Thankfully, one of my athletic friends finally made it across and started rustling through the bushes to come get me. As soon as the man heard my friend call my name, he ran away without a trace. I collapsed into my friend's arms and sputtered and spit and cried out my words. We went home and tried to file a report with the police/guards that own and patrol the springs. Minutes after we left the cabin, I heard them laughing and joking about how I was making it up, and saying the stupid woman must have been PMSing. I broke into tears again. To this day, I still remember the lustful and hungry look in his eyes as if he would get some sort of enjoyment from my dead corpse. Honestly, that was the worst feeling, being that close to death and not having it even in fate's hands, but those of an evil human being. My stepfather is an ex-alcoholic and drug addict who is heavily involved in several Catholic churches and the local AA community. The drugs and alcohol must have seriously fried his brain because he still has really bad judgment and decision-making skills, especially when it comes to people. He has brought so many sketchy people into my life. Thankfully, nothing serious happened. I get it, he's trying to help others who are struggling with the same battle he went through, and maybe he is making a difference in some people's lives, but he's been bringing these kinds of people into my life since I was 4 years old. Some of them even lived with us for a while. I had kids young. I was 20 when I had my son, and 23 when I had my daughter. When my son had his first birthday, my stepdad and mom retired. My mom had me when she was 40 and decided to travel, going on mission trips with their church and moving to another state. They started working with this Catholic organization that specifically helps people who struggle with alcohol and drug addictions. The church gave them housing among their nuns and priests and paid them all a small amount of money to buy food and necessities while they worked with them. One year around Christmas time, my parents came home for the holiday and brought an older nun with them. She was probably in her 50s. My family got together and went to Santa's workshop, which was super crowded. My mom, stepdad, their nun friends, and my sisters and their kids came too. My daughter was about 6 months old, maybe less. She is a beautiful red-headed baby. I have received many comments from family and strangers on how beautiful she and her red hair are, and probably have a few other stories of people who don't understand personal boundaries regarding children. The nun was immediately taken by how beautiful my baby is and kept touching her, talking to her and wanting to hold her. It was a bit uncomfortable because this was my first time meeting her. Also, she wasn't acting this way with any of the other children that were there with us. My son, who was a 3-year-old at the time and had since been diagnosed with ADHD, was a handful and running all over the place, getting into everything. It's so hard going to places with him and her without their dad. He didn't come with us because he was most likely working. So I think I was distracted because my son was getting into something he wasn't supposed to, and I let go of the stroller for a second, and this nun immediately took it. She told me she would give me a break, and since she was a friend of my parents, and my family was all around us, I decided to let this nun push my daughter in the stroller. Another incident happened where my son was getting into something, and I was distracted again for less than a minute, and when I turned back around, the nun and my daughter were gone. I freaked out, and my whole family was still around me. Nobody knew where this nun went, and she didn't say anything to anyone about leaving. My family and I immediately started looking everywhere. Luckily, there were many of us, and we found the nun at the front of the building, right near the exit. It was terrifying. When we found her, she just said that she was taking my daughter on a stroll. I decided to leave right after that happened, and so did everyone else in my family. Luckily, I haven't seen her since. So yeah, creepy old nun that knows my parents. Let's not meet again. Edit. I posted this as a comment response, but somebody suggested I add it to my post. I forgot to mention some of the weird comments the nun had made about how if she hadn't become a nun and had children, she imagined they would look just like my daughter because red hair runs in her family. Another small but interesting detail is my oldest sister, who was there too with her 3 kids, also had a baby girl who was only a couple of months old at the time. I don't understand why the nun lashed onto my daughter in particular, other than having her red hair. Is hair color that big of a deal, or would it have been because I was a young mother and didn't have their father with me? Update. I called my mom today and asked a few questions about the nun. I believe she legitimately is a nun. She worked with her organization and was introduced to them by another nun and priest they know. She frequently worked with them when they lived in Maryland, setting up retreats and meetings for addicts. At one point, the nun had planned to go on a mission trip with my mother, but something came up and it didn't happen. My mom and stepdad moved around a lot during their retirement and haven't talked to her since they left Maryland, which was about 2 or 3 years ago. They recently moved back home and left the organization, and my stepfather works for a whole new one doing similar work, and my mom fully retired. My mom doesn't think there was anything weird about this situation, that it was no big deal, and the nun took my daughter on a stroll and didn't think to tell anyone where she was going. I haven't seen her since because she still lives in Maryland. My parents don't even talk to her anymore, and I actively try to avoid people my parents hang around now. I am a teenager who helps his dad out on the allotment. If you don't know, an allotment is like a mini farm. You can plant veggies, have animals like chickens or rabbits to care for. This happened recently and it still creeps me out. In the evening, my dad says we need to go to the allotment to feed our chickens, as he forgot to feed them earlier that day. It was around 8 p.m. when I agreed and went into the car and started driving. When we got to our allotment, which is like a 15-minute drive, it was already dark outside. Not a lot, but dark. I opened the gates to the allotment, let my dad drive in, and then closed them. As I was about to, though, I saw a black car outside. The car belonged to a guy that used to be chill with my dad, but they both kind of fell off from talking to each other. My dad said he was becoming more mentally ill as the guy had a divorce and got his kids taken by the mother. The guy lives on the allotment now, even sleeping there. Remember, there are other people too in this allotment area, around 20 other ones, but there was no one else except me, dad, and the guy. After my dad parked the car, we got out and started getting the food for the chickens out the trunk. While my dad was doing that, I looked at his ex's friend's allotment, only to see him staring at us. It was dark, so I could only see a shadow of him, but I knew he was staring at us. I had a gut feeling, but I decided to ignore it. We went to the allotment, fed the chickens, and were about to go home until my dad almost forgot about something. He went to the shed at the end of the allotment to fetch something, and I was going to enter but had a feeling to wait it out instead. As I told my dad how much longer till he finds what he needs, I turned back to face our gate being opened. I didn't see it at first, but saw the guy trying to enter our allotment quietly. He stared at me and slowly closed the gate before just disappearing. I didn't react or say anything. I just stood there. I thought of telling my dad but didn't want to scare him or something. In the end, this isn't a horror movie where I should scream like a girl. When my dad left the shed, now we could go. As we were leaving, we heard a sound like an axe hitting the wood nonstop. We knew something was wrong. We quickly walked to our car, started it, and went to the gate. I left the car, creeped out by the guy being around in the allotment. I quickly opened the gate and let my dad drive through. As I was closing the gate, I saw something that terrified me immediately. The guy was just standing there, probably 20 meters away from me, looking at me. I couldn't see any details, but just darkness on him. He was holding something in his hand, but then he just moved and went into some bushes. My dad got out of the car to lock the gate. He looked at the bushes through the closed gate and rushed to his car. When we left and started driving, I told my dad he saw what I saw. He said he saw him hiding in the bushes, and he was squatting looking at us. Dad said he saw him holding something too, like an axe or a knife. We left pretty terrified, but we tried to laugh it off, knowing we were probably close to being attacked, or worse, dead. We came back to the allotment at the same time, around 8 p.m., a few days after what happened. We saw the guy's car in the allotment, and we knew we needed to be quick with feeding the chickens. As we did so, everything was going fine until we were about to leave. My dad stopped me and we head over a blue shed. My dad told me, "He's there. He's in the bushes." My heart dropped. I told my dad where he was and he said, "A 5-second walk," and we were done. We quickly ran to the car, closed it, and drove off. For a second I saw him. He had an axe. He wanted to sneak up on us and harm us. He wanted to kill us. The events in this story actually messed with my head a bit, and it took me a while to come to terms with it. About 10 years ago, I studied abroad. I had a few friends in this new country, and was glad to find a place to live with some cool people my age. I started hanging with this crew, which became my friends, and we used to smoke a lot of weed. Things were cool. There was this one friend of my roommates named Frank that came over to our place from time to time. I thought it was odd because he was like twice everybody's age. He was very intense as a person and made me feel slightly uncomfortable. First time I met him, he seemed extremely suspicious of me and would ask me all kinds of questions that would suss me out. But he had a decent sense of humor and would always crack great jokes. In a way, he was kind of charming and my roommates seemed to love him. Also, he always brought pizza. I asked one of my friends what the deal was with this guy and he was like, "Oh, you didn't know? Last year he found his wife and her brothers murdered in their flat. He is under investigation, but he didn't do it." I was taken aback by this. How could they really know he didn't do it, and why did they want to hang around with a potential psycho? I gave it the benefit of the doubt, but I certainly saw Frank in a new light now. Time went, and Frank came by our place almost daily. He was very clever and sly, manipulative. I got to know more about his background. He used to be in a gang when he was my age. He had been in prison most of the time in between then and now for violence. This did not help me in trusting him. I could not believe how naive my roommates were to trust this man. Then police went out and declared him a suspect. By now, this had become the biggest investigation ever in that particular area. He was interrogated but released for a lack of evidence. Back home at our place, he would sit and talk about how he was a victim of a conspiracy, and all of my friends would nod and believe him. I felt crazy being the only one who didn't believe it. He must have sensed it because he took me outside and asked me if I believed him. I said, "Yeah, sure I did." Because by now I was starting to get really afraid of him. I asked him about the murders and he told me his vision of the event where he, according to him, found the bodies. It was gruesome, but I still had doubts. To my horror, he would at another time crack jokes about the whole thing. Who in their right mind would joke about that? In my mind, only a complete psychopath. I started researching what a psychopath actually is, and learned that this guy fit every classical definition. I freaked out because I couldn't figure out what he really wanted from us. I started getting paranoid and started believing that he might actually be planning on killing me and my roommates. I couldn't tell this to my roommates because they were fully blinded by this guy's charades and trusted him. At one point, I started sleeping with a knife in my bed. That's how scared I was that he was going to come and murder me, like he murdered those poor souls. This was a horrible time for me. On top of that, police had been tipped off about the relatively large amounts of weed being kept in the house, and started raiding the place. 2 of my roommates were busted, and this marked the breakup of our collective. The day I moved out, Frank helped me with my stuff and looked at me menacingly, as I always found him. "You are alright," he said. "I actually planned on killing you, but you're okay." Kid you not. If he told me this, the others would laugh it off as a joke, but I saw it very differently. I was very glad to leave after hanging out with this murderer on and off for 1.5 years. Frank would be arrested shortly after, starting a huge trial that lasted several years. I found some new friends and found my way back to some normality in my life. That's when I realized how messed up the whole thing was. I had been isolated with all of this and had no one else to go to. A year later, I was back in my home country and followed the trial. All the craziness that surfaced about this man during the trial would convince me that I was probably right all along. He was properly mental and was convicted of 4 life sentences. He will never be a free man again. I'm not a great storyteller, but here we go. In 1985, when I was 15, I got a job doing dishes at a pizza place. After a while, I got moved up to the kitchen, making the pies and pasta. The owner usually had teenage kids or drifters, homeless vets, etc. doing the dishes, and he paid cash. On one particular Saturday after our shift ended, this scrawny white drifter who slept out of his beat-up car asked me if I could go to the mall and help him return something. I had asked him earlier to buy me beer, and so this was our trade-off. Off to the mall we went in his 1970s land barge. The item did not look new, but I tried to return the telescope to the store and, without a receipt, I was turned away. This drifter didn't seem that concerned with the failed transaction, but insisted that we cruise the mall parking lot looking for girls. Teen girls, as it turned out, mind you. It really only seemed cheesy to me at the time, but it really creeps me out today. Looking back, I see what he was doing. Returning an item for a refund was just a ploy, and to me being a decent-looking teenage kid, it only struck me later that he was trying to lure girls into the car. Luckily, none of them took the offer. His MO was ridiculous, and I was only embarrassed. He was in his mid-30s, but I could have and would have taken him down if something happened. A few months passed, and he was long gone from a dishwashing job, and I haven't seen him since. I was in my friend's neighborhood, and we were walking to the basketball court at the park to shoot hoops. Who rolls up on me in the street? Creepy drifter in his old car. I was thinking, oh, not this guy again. After a brief hello, I said we were headed to play hoops, and he said something like this as he drove away. I'm just looking for girls to meet. You know how it is. Keep in mind that this was somewhat isolated middle-class neighborhood, and he had no business being up in there. It was foolish of me to not report him, and it still bothers me. I just thought of him as an asshole when I should have realized the threat. I hope he didn't harm any girls. I posted my scariest experience yesterday, but my husband and I had quite a few freaky incidents where we used to live. A small town in North Carolina, and one particularly creepy one near our new place in Texas. This is one from North Carolina. It didn't scare me as much then as it should have until it was too late. We never felt safe living there, but again, had to for 3 more years. We lived in an old barn that had been renovated into 2 apartments, split right down the middle. Both sides had 2 floors and a basement. It had a pond down the hill, behind it in a huge field stretched out in place of a front yard. Right smack dab in the middle of the field was a junk pile. Old rusty trash cans, tools, and just junk. It also had the remains of an old doghouse our neighbor had built and then set out there to rot when the dog died. Important later. So we had neighbors on the other side of the barn/duplex. A very sweet older couple. They had a garden right around the corner of the house where the wife would spend her day while her husband was at work. They mentioned one day that food had started disappearing from the kitchen. I thought I was losing my mind until an entire loaf of bread disappeared. They chalked it up to their delinquent daughter, stopping in without telling them and shopping as she'd done it before. Months went by, and every now and again she'd mention something her daughter had stolen. Canned food, prepared meals from the fridge, a couple of pots and pans, some toilet paper, and so on. They never reported it because they didn't want their daughter to be in trouble. We just thought the whole thing was sad. Weird stuff started happening around the house. We found the remnants of a campfire by the pond one day and a bar of Irish Spring soap floating in the water. One day I looked out the window towards the pond and saw what I thought was a person standing near the water. It scared the heck out of me, and I pointed it out to my husband. The longer we looked, we realized it was actually an item of clothing hanging from a tree. Maybe to dry. We were too spooked to go look, and it was gone the next day. Here's where it gets super scary. We started missing food. It only happened twice, but the second time we had gone on the rather long walk up our driveway to the mailbox. We'd left the door unlocked, and when we got back, the ingredients for grilled cheese were on the kitchen counter, and there was a hot pan still on the stove. We called 911 and they did a search of the yard. They didn't look in the field because it was just so wide open, with just the junk pile in the middle. Finally, one day our neighbor left her door open for 5 minutes and went to the garden right by the house. In that time, her purse was stolen from the living room. No cars had pulled up, so somebody had been watching her and took the opportunity. She called the police, and the next day they did another search. This time they went to the field and realized there was the old makeshift doghouse. Inside there was a bed of old blankets, food wrappers in a neat pile, 2 beers, rolls of toilet paper, our neighbor's missing pans, heroin stuff, and the sweet lady's missing purse. Everything out of it and stuffed with leaves to use as a pillow. There had been a heroin addict living on our property for months, stealing from us, bathing in the pond, and watching us from the best opportunity to do so. He never stole anything of value except for the purse, so I think he intended to be there a long while. I guess when he came back and saw his house empty, he just never came back. This happened 6 years ago when I was 13. Bear with me in my story because I've been on this subreddit a while without actually posting on it. I have a lot of creepy encounters, but this is the first I'd like to share. Anyways, during the summer, my mom had to leave us and tend to my grandpa, who had cancer and lived over 300 miles away. It was just my dad, my 16-year-old brother, and I for all 3 months of summer vacation. My dad worked all day, and my brother Dean went to summer school, which meant I was home alone for a good portion of the day. We live in a fairly safe neighborhood, and I knew always to lock the doors. One day I was preparing to cook lunch. Grilled peanut butter and jelly sandwiches are the bomb. I was heating up the frying pan when I heard scratching coming from the front door. I turned off the heat and inched closer to the front door. I slowly see the doorknob jiggle and slowly turn. Thankfully, the top lock was still locked, but I heard it being tampered with. I quietly run into the kitchen and grab the frying pan. I really don't know why. I crawl into our pantry and post a status on Facebook asking someone to call the police and send them to my address. I hear somebody enter their room and walk around. They don't really sound like they're doing anything except walking. Then the footsteps get louder and louder. The pantry door opens and I hit the person in the head with as much force as I could with the hot pan. The person, a man in his 40s, is knocked out. The police arrive a few minutes after this happens. They call my dad and my brother to inform them of what happened. The police officer takes me to the station because I refuse to let them leave, and my brother agrees to meet me there. It turns out that the guy had a knife in his pocket and duct tape in the other. The police searched his car, which was parked in front of the house, found rope, trash bags, girls' clothing, another knife, and a single picture of me in the glove compartment. I really don't know what would have happened to me. Just for context, my boyfriend and I are homeless, and we live in our car. There is a road that leads to a quiet beach on the bay near some train tracks, and there is only one road to exit. So not a lot of people come down this way, unless it's for beach access. People going to work in the industrial plants on the road, none of which were open, or going to an AA meeting. Again, none of which were open at the time, or if they are sleeping in their cars as well. Nothing in the area was open except maybe a couple of bars, and even those were a good 3 or 4 blocks away. Most of the stretch of road has 8-hour parking signs, so there are usually at least a few other people camped for the night, most of whom we have seen before, but tonight there wasn't as many. Just a few vehicles taking advantage of the overnight parking. We parked a little further up the road than we normally do, hoping to get a better internet connection. It was a little after 12:30 a.m. and we were relaxing watching YouTube with the dog, starting to get sleepy when we heard a car pull up behind us with their lights off. We cover our windows totally around so nobody can see in, but we can peek out if we move the blanket, and we can see headlights from cars passing or approaching. My boyfriend said it was a van. We didn't think much of it and kept trying to watch our show, annoyed with the spotty Wi-Fi connection. There were a few words exchanged on what sounded like was the other side of the street, not behind us where the van pulled up. It sounded like there were 3 or 4 people. A little bit later, the van drove off. Then we heard a knock on my side of the window, driver's side. We shut off the volume on the laptop and called out. Yeah? Silence. So we called out. Can we help you? But again, there was nothing. It was then that I realized that my door was unlocked, so I quickly locked it. After about 30 seconds of quietness, I pulled open the cover and nobody was there. Whatever. There are sometimes bums walking around. They could have thought we were someone else. It was silent for a while, then we could see in the light of the street lamp, through the crack on the sun reflector covering the front windscreen, the silhouette of somebody walking around the front of the car slowly. It was another solid minute after we saw the movement before we heard a quieter tapping on the passenger side window. This time my boyfriend pulled the cover down almost right away, and again we didn't see who it was. Right after this, there was a knock on my door again. It was right about then we realized that there was still more than one person around the car. There was no time for one person to get from the passenger side to my side between the second and third knock, and we had heard more than one voice prior. I started to think that maybe not everybody had gotten back inside from the van before it drove off. So after the third knock, I pulled my window covers down again almost all the way. I'm super annoyed and on edge by now. There was a skinny white male, probably in his mid-30s to early 40s, holding a flashlight and something else scooped awkwardly in the other hand. Almost like he was keeping it under his sweater, but we couldn't make it out. The windows were steamed up from us breathing inside with the windows shut tight, so it was really difficult to see out. He said, "Hey, I need a jump." Interesting, since there are no stores nearby. No reason to be down here at 1 a.m. We said, "Sorry, we're just about to take off. We're in a rush." He got frustrated and whined. "Come on, I've been down here for hours." Okay, if he had been down here for hours, why did he A, not ask us to help him out about 45 minutes prior when we pulled up, parked, let our dog out to eat, go potty, etc., and get our bed set up? Or B, attempt to start the car at any point? We never heard a motor rev up and an attempt to turn the engine or even the jingling of keys. Another creepy reason is why I could only see him. He said I need a jump. I've been down here for hours when I could clearly hear that there was more than one person around, but we couldn't see them. For one reason or another, they were standing out of view, not making themselves known. After this, he grumbled and went across the street to a white car with black rims that we had seen before, but not associated with him. I got this awful feeling in my gut, and even though all the windows were steamed up, I started the car and told my boyfriend to start wiping the windows so I could see, and I just started driving. We could feel that there was something sinister about the whole situation. For one reason or another, they were trying to get us to open a door or window. When that didn't work, they didn't respond because they didn't have a good reason made up yet, so after a couple of attempts to get us to open the door, they gave us the sob story, hoping we would get them out of the car so they could either steal the car while we were trying to help them or get to my boyfriend, either him directly or so they could get to me, or they were going to rob us for the laptop, which I am sure they could hear and see the glow of on the screen. The possibilities are unsettling and endless. Or maybe he was just a guy who happened to need a jump at 1 a.m., nowhere near any stores or houses, and I'm the jerk that left some poor guy down there on the side of the road, right? Well, we drove to McDonald's to eat something and parked in the back driveway of someone we knew so that we weren't right out in the open anymore. The lock on our trunk recently broke and is held together with only bungee cords, with most of our belongings inside, so it worries me that it could make us an easier target for thieves. The next morning, we were down there again and the white car with black rims was still there. Only now the back window was busted out, and the man was nowhere in sight. I think it was never his car to begin with. I think all of those people came in the van and one of them drove off so that the rest of them could rob someone outright or so they could break into the parked cars on the side of the street when no one was in them. It was really stressful and my boyfriend had been rattled for days. We are nervous to park in the same spot, so we are now looking to rent a residential driveway to park at night where we won't be so vulnerable. My boyfriend teased the dog for not barking, but I think it was very intuitive of him because if we needed to pretend we were inside, we would have been able to do so. Maybe it would have scared them right off. I like knowing he will wait and watch me to know what to do in stressful situations. I'm just so relieved that I was not down there by myself. Even the two of us together were pretty nervous, knowing that we were likely outnumbered, but if it were just a 120-pound female like myself in the car alone, I am worried they may have been a bit more aggressive about getting the door opened. Sometimes I think I watch too many murder investigation shows and conspiracy theory videos, and that may make me paranoid. Maybe it's the fact that my grandfather was a sex crimes and homicide detective for 30 years in the same area, and I grew up with him constantly warning me of the dangers that lurk in the dark and what can happen to a person. He taught me that real monsters are not boogeymen. They are just plain men. This happened about a year and a half ago. I was at work, night shift, a little past midnight and ordered DoorDash for myself and my supervisor since it was her birthday. I was happy to see I had the same driver as last time as I work in a small building among other identical buildings with a convoluted road system in between them all. It can be a little bit confusing for somebody not used to it. I had been watching the map and went outside once he was close by. I stood under a cluster of bright lights in our parking lot. Wearing neon yellow, you couldn't miss me. I immediately get a call from my driver asking me to come to him. I look around and don't see anyone until I walk a couple of yards to the center of the lot. He's sitting on the side of my building by the dumpster, where there is no light. He also has his lights off. I'm thinking, what the heck, dude? I start waving my arms and telling him I'm in front of the building. He's on the side. He hangs up and just chills there for a minute, I guess. At this point, I'm really annoyed because our food is getting cold, and this guy delivered to me in this exact same spot a week before. Finally, he turns his lights on and comes over to me. As soon as he pulls up, he's speaking another language into his phone, which then translates to English. Something like, "Hello, I am practicing English. I need new friends. Will you be my friend?" And then puts the phone towards me. I feel like I am speaking to a child because, hello, this is inappropriate, and I just say, "Oh, that's a cool app," and look at him waiting. He keeps speaking into the app about needing friends, and I tell him my supervisor is waiting for me and reach my hand out for the food. He tries to touch my hand and then asks for my number. At this point, the fact that he had tried to get me in the dark plus his persistence turned my growing annoyance into fear. I tell him I need the food and he asks me to get in his car in perfect English. At this moment, somebody in my sister's building comes out and makes their way over to the lot. He finally gives me my food and scurries off, which freaked me out. Why after all that would he speed off at the sight of another person? Clearly his intentions were not good. I reported all of this to DoorDash at the time as well as my local police and on social media, and it turns out he'd done this to somebody who lives 2 miles away from me. She had also ordered late at night, and he apparently asked her if she lived alone and if they could hang out while holding her food hostage. DoorDash assured me that they had deactivated him, but his boldness plus the fact that he seemed to only drive late at night makes me think that he does this a lot and has probably already assaulted someone. I was about 9 years old, so this was probably 1996, playing in my family's huge front yard. We lived in a quiet neighborhood just outside of city limits. A man drove up and pulled this car over on the side of the road. He got out and greeted me. He then told me that he was lost and asked me how to get to a specific city over an hour away. I knew the name of the city, but obviously not how to get there. I pointed the direction of the highway and said I thought that might be the right way. I vaguely remember telling him I didn't know and that he should ask an adult. To this, the man started making comments such as, "Oh, well, I'm sure you can help me. You look like a really smart girl." Then the man pulls out a map and sets it on the hood of his car. Asks me if I can come show him on his map where the specific city was. As a child, it didn't even dawn on me that the stranger had a map and would be able to find the city himself. I just kept saying I didn't know how to get to the city he was asking about. He kept telling me I looked smart and emphasizing that he was lost and needed help. And because somebody nearby was mowing their lawn, it was hard to hear, so the man would say he couldn't hear me and ask me to come closer. I didn't move closer, but he did. My parents had planted hedges around our yard, but at the time the shrubs were pretty short. At this point, the man had moved from the front of his car and started crossing the hedge line, asking me to come closer so he could hear me. Now here's the part I wasn't aware of, and my mom filled me in on when I was older. She and my dad were inside the home. We have a bunch of windows facing the front yard, but also a bunch of trees between the house and yard, so my parents wouldn't necessarily see me. My mom said our dog Annie, a 3-year-old German Shepherd, Golden Retriever, and Boxer mix, was going apeshit. Annie was barking non-stop while running from the door and windows over to my parents over and over again. My parents were in the middle of something and just thought Annie probably had to pee. My mom went to let Annie outside, and my mom said the moment she opened the door, she flew off the porch. My mom swears Annie was hauling ass so fast that the dog didn't even touch the porch. Now back to the scene between me and the stranger. He was at the hedge line, maybe 12 feet across from me. I'm just standing there and suddenly Annie comes shooting across the yard and stops in front of me. She was the sweetest dog, and we have had her since she was a puppy. The runt of her litter, but still a good-sized gal considering her mix of breeds. Now here Annie was. She had a full-on mohawk from head to tail, standing straight up. She was baring her teeth, snarling and snapping towards the strange man. I remember looking at her and trying to get her to calm down. Still, this didn't stop the strange man. He slowly took a step forward into the yard. Annie seemed to be fully aware that this man had evil intentions because she never backed down. In fact, she kept me behind her and kept backing up, pushing me back. She was not going to let that man get past her. Still, the guy cautiously made a couple more steps. Around this time, my parents looked out the window to see where Annie went. Of course, they see the whole scene out in the yard and freak out. They ran out the door screaming. I just remember being so confused with everything going on. The strange man, the neighbor's loud mower, Annie looking crazy, and my parents running and screaming are all strange. When the strange man saw my parents coming, he ran back to his car and gunned it down the street. I vaguely remember seeing the stranger's map flying in the air as my dad threw me over his shoulder and ran back towards the house. So yeah, it seems like this dude was totally trying to abduct me and my dog saved my life. Like, it's crazy to think what could have happened. Annie was an incredibly good girl that we had till I was 17. In my previous posts, I talked about the man that tried to take my sister off our front lawn. To recap, a 1.5 years ago, my adopted mother called me one day to go pick my little sister after she got on the wrong bus. When I got there, I found a strange man talking to her. I scared him off, but over the next few months, weird things kept happening around our yard. Finally, one of Rosie's coats disappeared and was returned hours later, with all the tears and rips fixed. After what seemed like months of asking the police for help, they said if anything else happened, they'd come over right away. That brings us to barely 24 hours later. It was a Saturday night and Claire was supposed to go out with Diane for dinner, a movie, and maybe some dancing. I was supposed to go out with my own girlfriend, and a neighborhood kid was supposed to watch all 4 kids. Diane's 2 and Claire's 2. The girl was like 14 and her parents lived 2 doors down and would be home all night. All of us were really unsure about it, and after much deliberation, I insisted that I'd be the one to stay home, and my girlfriend would come over to help. Keep me company, shall we say. Fast forward a few hours later, the kids had just eaten dinner and the ladies were ready to go out. I was inside getting dinner ready for me and my girlfriend, and they just left as she came up our driveway. I thanked her for changing her plans, and she let herself in. Bit of backstory on my girlfriend Tara. She's 19, but very tall and very thin. When she gets dressed up, she can look late 20s and be absolutely drop-dead gorgeous. However, when she's dressed down in sweats and a tank top, that probably won't stay on through the night. She's lucky to pass for legal to drive. That's a small detail that becomes important. So, we had a good night hanging out around the kids. The boys, David and Sam, are absolutely nuts over her and have been trying to steal her from me since they first met Tara. They don't leave her lap throughout the whole movie, and the girls, Rosie and Kaylee, wouldn't leave mine. Everything went smoothly, even bedtime, and before long all 4 of us are fast asleep, leaving us to finally go downstairs to enjoy our date. We have a romantic candlelight dinner a few hours late, but that didn't matter. Put on a movie that neither one of us paid any attention to and fell asleep on each other. It's nearly midnight when I hear the screaming. Flinging myself off the couch and out from underneath the very startled Tara, I take the stairs by the twos and end up in Rosie's room where she and Kaylee are in the bottom bunk shrieking. Both girls practically jump into my arms, nearly hysterical, and neither one can make any sense until I see Rosie pointing out the window. I feel Tara behind me and pass my girls off to her before turning off the light and looking out the window. He's there, standing out there in our front yard, staring up into Rosie's room at the top bunk where she had just been sleeping. My heart stops and I duck down before he can see me, my voice practically hissing as I tell Tara to take the girls into David's room, lock the door and call the police. I make sure they're in there before I check the window again and they're gone. Nowhere to be seen. My heart starts racing at this point and I double check the door. As I hear Tara on the phone with the police, the sound of the front door jiggling breaks me from concentration. I move to the stairs and watch from the windows as he moves from the front door to the back, trying each point of access he can find before turning back to the front yard. At this point, I'm set off like crazy. Not only am I kind of anxious for myself, but I also have Rosie upstairs who's already been traumatized by this guy. 3 other kids who are now awake and scared, and my girlfriend. 5 people I do absolutely anything to protect. Seeing him continue to try to each window and door, I panic as I realize he can get into our garage again, and that's where we keep our sports equipment, like baseball bats and hockey sticks. Things that could be used to break open windows. When I hear the garage door start to open, I lose it. The next thing I remember is the police showing up and Tara pulling me off the guy before the cops take him to the ground. As they get him in the back of the squad car, he's screaming and cussing at me. Tara fills me in that after she heard the front door slam open and she ran downstairs after me, and found me having tried to drag the man to the ground, the 2 of us throwing punches as I was screaming for him to never come near my family again. When they finally get him under control and come to talk to me, they explained that the reason they got there so quickly was that they had been in the area checking in on things when they found an abandoned car on the other side of the forest, directly across from where the forest ends beside our place. They found it suspicious and checked the car only to find kids' toys and pictures. When they got Tara's call, they knew the 2 were connected. When the 2 mothers got home, they revealed that the pictures they had found were of Rosie. Dozens of pictures on various days and in various places. The back seat was full of toys for a little girl and the trunk had clothes and blankets. When he finally confessed, he told the police that he'd been watching her for months before he even tried to take her off the lawn, that he was stopped by me, and that when he saw her mother go out and what he thought was a young teenage babysitter come over, my girlfriend Tara, he planned on breaking in to take her. He never really explained why, other than he wanted her, but he ended up getting charged with stalking a minor and misconduct. So the creepy guy that not only tried to take my little sister off the curb, but also stalked her for months and was going to break into our home to take her, doing who knows what to the babysitter and the other kids in order to do that. We've met more than I ever wanted to, and if I ever see you near her or the others again, I'll finish what my girlfriend stopped me from doing. Background. I immigrated to a small town, around 20,000 in the northeastern US, a little over a year ago from Australia. There are a handful of people of my nationality here, but we are pretty few and far between. I work in a job where I have a little bit of profile in the community. That's somewhat relevant. A few weeks ago at work, I saw this message in my Facebook other inbox, the one where messages from people I'm not friends with go. It's obviously from a dude in the area based on the limited information I can read on his profile, so I figured it was some random person who'd seen my work, found me on Facebook and wanted to drop me a line. It happens every now and then, so I wasn't terribly fazed. It read, "Hello, how are you? I've been to Australia 3 times for a total of 1.5 years. I lived in this city and here, and I went back in 93 and 2014. Please put in a friend request." I couldn't figure out how to do it from my end, as there was no option. Hope to hear from you. Thanks, Phil. Later that night, I get home from work and I'm having dinner with my girlfriend who owns a bar I work weekends at. She starts dying laughing and says, "Oh shit, I forgot to tell you. And you're going to kill me." My first customer today wanders in, and already I can tell he's a bit weird. He asked for a beer and I give him one, and then he asked me what age ranges of women come in here. I tell him like 25 plus, he says. That's my age range. I'm 44 and keep rambling on to her. Somehow he gets to the topic of Australia and how he's been there a few times. She says, oh, my boyfriend is that nationality actually. And I cut her dead off with, wait, is his name Phil? She falls about laughing and is like, yup. I yelled, F me, man. Apparently, he spent a good hour showing off his knowledge of my country's slang terms and geographical tidbits before asking where I lived. No, where exactly does she live? Like what street? What my full name was, and whether I worked there. He told her that he loves people of my nationality and that he's a state certified guide so he could take me out canoeing or hiking or whatever. Yeah, like I'm gonna frickin' do that in the woods with a strange dude who tracked me down over Facebook just because I'm from a country he loves. He goes back into the bar 2 nights later, a Friday night, and my girlfriend texts me saying that he asked her whether he got my full name right because he sent me a Facebook message and he never responded. He then proceeded to repeat his repertoire of my country's lingo and told a handful of off-color jokes, offending at least one female bar patron. He said that he would be back the following night to see me. A snowstorm that weekend meant I dodged the bullet that Saturday night, but the following weekend he walked in the door of the bar as I was seating a couple of customers. I give him a token. How's it going? And he launches straight into, are you the nationality guy? Shit. Well, I'm one of them, I said. He perches himself right on a bar stool in front of me, orders a beer, and proceeds to talk nonstop. Rattles off all the places he's been, countless random trivia facts about my country. Do you know how much total area the continent consists of? And stuff like that. And all of the places he wanted to visit. He wasn't just intense and creepy, he had absolutely no situational awareness. It was a busy Saturday night in a bar. I'm the only bartender and I'm running around the room serving people, but he wouldn't stop talking at me the entire time. Thankfully, the girl sitting next to him was also not from around here. Colombian, I think, and he got distracted talking to her about taking her out into the woods. Eventually, he asked for his check, pointedly showed me the tip line and asked me if it was enough. It wasn't, but please screw off anyway, and left. Although initially my girlfriend had thought it was funny and that he was bent on meeting me, she quickly became creeped out by his behavior too. I managed to avoid him for a week or two after that. Until one Friday afternoon when the girlfriend and I were having a quick lunch at the pub before I went into the office. We sat at a table next to the main bar, and who should cut his conversation with the bartender, whom we know, in mid-sentence, turn around and stride over. Your friendly neighborhood creep. I've got something to show you, he said, as he rummaged in the pocket of his jeans before pulling out a large handful of loose change. My country's change. Yeah, I've seen Australia's currency before. Do you actually carry that around with you all the time? Well, I love Australia. Yeah, that much is evident. He again gave me this shtick about how he wants to visit this city and that city. For the third time I've heard it now, and again failed to recognize my half-turned away, ignoring him body language. Mercifully, the bartender came over to take our order, and Phil left to pay his tab. The bartender brought over a slip of paper Phil had written his information on, in case anybody was interested in going out in the woods for outdoor activities. It was like something they'd find in Ted Bundy's Personal Effects. The handwriting and general layout of this note made me immediately and genuinely question this guy's grip on reality. He leaves and I breathe an audible sigh of relief. We start talking to the bartender about our other weird interactions with the guy. And of course, who should return quietly, probably hearing everything in the process because he left his coat on the coat rack. He showed up at the bar again later that night while I was at the office, and told my girlfriend that he's also a profession that involves being around children. Ugh, want to know the best day of my life? He asked her. He said he was asked to speak to an audience of students at an all-girls private school one time, when he was in Australia in his 30s. Afterwards, he said he slept with one of the seniors. Somehow I didn't ask for further details. I haven't seen him since, thankfully, but he cropped up elsewhere in what I hope is a small world. Small town coincidence. I had relayed this story to a coworker last Friday, after she told me a similar story about being harassed by a weirdo that she talked to on a dating website. Today, she says, I think the stalker outdoor guide who's following you around contacted me on a dating site. Sure enough, I look at his profile and it's him. No question. She takes a bunch of screenshots of what I can gather is his About Me section and texts them to me. They are the ramblings of a madman. I'd post the screenshots, but they'd probably give him away, and I don't want to bear the wrath. Every summer of my childhood, my whole family would travel to stay at my grandparents' home in a small town in Ohio. They didn't have a big house, so all 4 of us girls had to share a room, with me and my oldest cousin in one bed and my 2 middle cousins in the other. It was incredibly cramped, so we would try to stay outside as much as possible, attempting to find something to do. This particular summer I was 9 and my cousins were 12, 13, and 16. It was the late 90s and we were bored out of our minds. So when the oldest said that she was taking a walk, we all begged to come along. I knew she was only taking a walk though so she could sneak out to smoke, but I didn't care. I just wanted out of the house. We'd usually walk for about a mile, go to McDonald's or a drugstore for snacks, then turn around and go home. It was evening and we were on our way back. I was getting bored, the novelty of leaving the house having worn off. The 2 middle girls were walking ahead, talking about boy bands, and the oldest was hanging behind, trying to hide the fact that she was smoking. Suddenly, I noticed a man with a dog about half a block behind us. I was so excited and hoped that he would get close enough that I could pet the dog. Sure enough, he starts getting closer. I didn't think the oldest was paying attention and the middle girls were way ahead, so I figured I could stay behind a bit and play with the dog. I start to walk toward the dog when my cousin grabs me and pulls me close. Don't, she whispers. He has a knife, just keep walking. I glanced behind us and sure enough, the man is holding a knife. He didn't say anything, he just kept following and staring at us. I had no idea that she was paying attention, let alone closely enough to notice the knife, but I'm glad she was. My cousin took me by the hand and hurried me home, trying to put as much space as possible between us and the man. We finally got home and ran inside. Thankfully, we never found out what he was going to use the knife for and we never saw him again. We also never walked after dark again. All of us are mothers now, and the idea of our kids being in this situation is terrifying. We try not to be helicopter moms, but we always try to have at least one of us with the kids and make sure the kids know the importance of being aware of their surroundings. There can be very scary people even in areas that feel safe. Oh, and my cousin quit smoking and got really into healthy living, so that's good too. I'm not sure if this is the right subreddit for this, but I for sure hope to never meet this POS again. This happened to me in high school when I was in 11th grade. I was 16 years old. The street I lived in was in New York City, and it was a pretty small street, so you could hear anything that happened at each end of it. You can hear kids laughing, kids falling from bikes, etc. This is an important detail for the story. Another important one is the house I lived in only had one front entrance to get into. The front entrance had 2 doors, a screen door, which was the first thing an outsider would see when they approached my house, and a wooden door. Both had locks, so nobody could just open the screen door unless they had a key. I note this due to all the videos I watched online of people just yanking screen doors open. I was living alone for a month and it was pretty fun and mundane. My parents were living in California at the time due to work. One day, while I was on my computer doing something, there were these strong knocks on the screen's front door. I left my room and approached the front wooden door cautiously. I'm an easily anxious person and it does not help that I keep watching crime documentary videos. The person on the other side knocked on my screen door again. I peered through the peephole of the wooden door and could see that this white middle-aged dude just standing there, moving his head side to side, and his body was doing those jumpy movements that people do when they are standing and waiting. I decided to open the wooden door a little bit, thinking the screen front door was going to protect me anyway, and asked him, "What's wrong?" The guy instantly responded, "There's been a car crash. Please come out here and help me. A kid that was riding his bike was run over." I asked, "Where is the car crash?" The guy responded, "Down the street over there." He pointed to one of the ends of the street. Remember how I said the street was small and I could hear anything? Even a kid falling from his bike, so I sure as heck could have been able to hear a freaking crash. The second he said that, my guard immediately went up, and while I was quite scared, I was also mad for some reason. "Call the police. I don't know why you're coming to me." The guy pushed on with what he was saying before and asked me to come out to see the car crash with him and to see if there's anything we could do to help. I remember saying, "Call 911 or I will. They'll be able to handle this much better than I can." I then closed the wooden door and locked it. If you're wondering, I didn't call the police. I just went to my room and watched YouTube videos. I know it's a weird thing to do, but I was trying to calm myself down because at that point my heart was beating so fast. I kept looking at the time. I forgot what specific time it was, but I remember it being in the afternoon. The sky was bright blue at least. I waited for a few hours when I was sure the guy would be gone. I went back to the front entrance and opened the wooden door, made sure nobody was there, and opened the screen door to see the car crash at the end of the street. Why did I do this? I wanted to truly make sure that there was no car crash. I know I said I would have heard it, but I wanted to make sure I wasn't ignoring an actual thing that I just happened to not hear. There was nothing there. No kid and no crashed car. Just the usual street end that I'm used to. At that time, I felt a sense of relief. It was only a few years later when I thought about this moment again and realized that God may have had some malicious intention for me. Good thing I kept myself level-headed and realized that there's no way there could have been a crash without me hearing. Who knows what the heck would have happened. I'm still relatively new to Reddit, so I don't really know too much about it. I am a fan of YouTube videos though. When I'm doing things around the house, I like to listen to readings on YouTube of Reddit stories, both hilarious and terrifying ones. One day, as I was cleaning, a video I was listening to finished and automatically played the next one, which was a stalker story reading. After hearing other people's encounters, I decided that maybe I'm ready to share one of mine too. I posted a story of mine earlier and I got a lot of positive reinforcement, so I think that I want to post another one. This is an encounter that went on over the span of maybe a month, then continued on from a distance for the next 2 years. This is a pretty long story, so I'm sorry if it gets boring. Growing up, I lived in a really small town. I don't mean footloose small. With a mere 14,000 people, I mean really small, with only 1,000 people when I moved here in the first grade. I didn't make any close friends all throughout my school days and wanted to get pretty far away. The farthest my parents would let me go for school, though, was a few states over to study Japanese at a private university in Ohio. My freshman year flew by. I met a ton of new people, and my Facebook exploded with friend requests from both domestic and international students alike. Not remembering everyone I met, I accepted them all. I was young and excited to make new friends. I ended up making a lot of good ones. I was actually kind of, dare I say it, popular. By my second year, the leader of my department had deemed me the big sister of the program. It was a small program, but I was usually the one that people would turn to for help. I was good at what I was studying and I was proud. There was a building on campus that was open 24 hours for students. It had couches, armchairs, and coffee tables on one half and tables and regular chairs on the other, separated by a big fireplace. There was also 2 little secluded loft areas for small groups that wanted a little more privacy. People would go there to study or even to just hang out with friends. There was a cafe attached to it, so it made it ideal for a study spot. Coffee plus students equal productiveness. Because I am a coffee fanatic, some might say coffee snob, I was always in the study building where I had access to coffee when I wasn't in class or catching those oh-so-rare hours to sleep. The only problem, well, if you can call it a problem, was that because I was the go-to person for the program, I would only sit down for a few minutes before somebody would come up and sit with me, be it to study or to chat. Usually the latter. When the end of sophomore year was rolling around, the dreaded exam time was approaching quickly. I was studying abroad my junior year and wanted to leave my school on a positive note. I was desperately trying to get some studying done, but people kept stopping to chat with me in the study building. Don't get me wrong, I'm not complaining like, oh wow, I'm so popular I can't even stand it. No, I loved my friends, but they couldn't really grasp the concept of silent studying. A few of them were already done with exams and just wanted to talk. I decided to try my luck in the library. Instead of heading to the story building, I went to the library and sat down at one of the little tables by a big window. I was on a roll. I had gotten through quite a few big projects and finished writing one of my presentations. I sat up a little straighter and stretched out my arms in front of me, letting out a satisfied sigh. A voice from behind me suddenly said, "Working hard?" The library wasn't a popular space to study. Everyone usually went to the study building or got some private rooms on the other side of the building, so the sudden voice behind me made me jump a bit. Yeah, I replied. He was a Chinese guy on the heavier side, a few inches taller than me. Sorry, do I know you? Now, I don't remember his name, so for this story, I'll just call him Chen. Yeah, we met at orientation. We are friends on Facebook, he said. His English was good, but sometimes his accent was hard to understand. He still didn't give me his name, but he looked at me so expectantly that I felt bad for not remembering him. Oh yeah, I blurted out. It's nice to see you. How are finals going? We talked a little bit about school and some other small talk. It was getting late though, so I excused myself to go back to my shared house for the evening. The next day, I avoided the study building again, hoping to get the same amount of studying done that I had the day before. I walked quietly into the hall, glancing around. I didn't see Chen, so I went to my table from the day before and sat down. It wasn't 15 minutes before he appeared though, sitting down next to me and trying to strike up a convo. I was a little bit annoyed, but I stayed polite. I excused myself after about an hour of awkward conversation with the stranger and gave up for the evening. It was still early, but I grabbed some friends and we went out for dinner at a local diner. The next day, I decided to try again. I went into the library and, much to my dismay, I saw him sitting at my favorite table. At first, I was annoyed, but then I thought, wait a second, he is here first, so I can just grab a different table and he won't notice. I walked to the other side of the room, passing rows and rows of bookshelves, and sat down at a corner table. If he found me, it would have to be because he was actively looking. About an hour later, I heard footsteps heading around the quiet room. Then a quickened pace headed straight for me. Hey. I groaned internally, but put on a polite smile. Hey there. He had brought his stuff and sat down across from me. After a painful half hour, I finally gave up and decided to head home. The next day, I decided to talk to the front desk about getting a private room. They were on a different floor, so surely I'd be safe there. Nope, he found me. After knocking repeatedly on the door and staring at me, I could no longer pretend that I didn't see him or hear him, even with my headphones on. If I waited much longer, I'm sure the other people in the area would be just as annoyed as I am, so I didn't want to ruin their study time. I opened the door. Oh hey, I was actually just getting ready to leave. I lied. So soon? I was hoping you could check my English paper. Ah man, way to make me feel guilty. Well, I could spare a few. Cool. He pushed his way in, sitting down at the table. Sighing, I sat back down and took his paper. As I started checking it, he started talking about how he had never shared a meal with a girl before because he thinks it's such an intimate thing. I was checking his paper as quickly as I could, trying to get away from the awkward encounter, so I let out the occasional, and head nod, barely listening. Suddenly, he starts pulling food out of his bag from a nearby Chinese restaurant and hands me a fork. I'm sitting there thinking, wait, what? He just said he thinks sharing food with a girl is intimate. Luckily, I was able to form words. Your paper looks good. I don't see any real English mistakes. I can't stay though. I have plans to eat dinner with some friends. Sorry. I passed him his paper, stood up and left, slightly creeped out. I would have blamed it on cultural differences, but I knew a ton of other Chinese kids on campus and none of them were as weird as Chen. In fact, I was close to a lot of the other Chinese kids because they were so cool. But Chen was giving off some really scary vibes and I didn't want to see him again. The next day, I decided it would be better to just study at the study building. I'd rather be surrounded by chatterbox friends than alone with a creepy stranger. The loft was open when I arrived. You have to climb stairs to get to it, and you can't really tell if anyone was up there, let alone who, unless you are really trying to look up through the cracks or go halfway up the stairs. Practically giddy with joy, I rush up the stairs and settle into the armchair with a cup of coffee from the cafe. The giddiness of finding the loft open quickly wore off, though, as I went into the productive mode. I got a lot of studying done, but after about 2 hours, movement downstairs caught my eye. Chen was walking around, looking around the open floor. I took a deep, quiet breath and tried to push the paranoia down. No big deal, right? Maybe he was just tired of the library and wanted to study in this building for a change, for the first time in 2 years. Then I heard it. Those awful words. He was asking a group of people I knew if they'd seen me, asking about me by name. Luckily, they arrived after me and didn't see me go up into the loft. I was safe. He looked around a little bit more and finally left. The next day I promised a Japanese friend of mine that I'd help him with his paper. My friend was a 6.5 foot tall, ripped like a quarterback phenomenon of a man named Tetsuo. We agreed to meet in the loft at a set time, and I arrived a bit early to make sure that we could actually get the loft since they were a bit popular. I was sitting in the armchair when I heard him start coming up the stairs. He was 15 minutes early. How very Japanese, I thought jokingly. My heart dropped when I looked up though. Not Tetsuo. Chen. He silently stalked over to the sofa, dropped his things, and sat on the coffee table in front of me. He put a hand on each of the arms of the chair, locking me in, and proceeded to forcefully kiss me. He was bigger than me in both height and weight, so it took a lot to push him off me. I'm sure that the rush of adrenaline helped. "What are you doing?" I shrieked. "I'm in love with you. I want to be with you, and I want you to marry me and move back to China with me and start a family with me." He started to lean in again. I leaned back and tried to push him away. "Get away from me." He leaned back a little, but kept his hands on the arms of the chair and his knees on either side of mine, locking me in so I couldn't get away. "What's wrong?" What's wrong? Did he really just ask me that? Was he stupid as well as crazy? "You." "No, just no. Get away from me." I tried to wiggle free, but he was stronger than me. "I don't even know you." "But I know you," he said. "I need you and I love you." I was about to scream for help when Tetsuo came pounding up the stairs in a rush. Chen may have been bigger than me, but Tetsuo was way bigger than Chen. He looked right at me, asking me in Japanese, "Are you okay?" I replied in Japanese, saying, "Help me." He started walking towards us, and Chen immediately leant back and let me go. Tetsuo took my hand, pulling me to sit on the sofa right next to him, saying in English, "You promised to help me with my English paper." I was shaking, but I felt significantly safer with Tetsuo there to help me. He could easily take down Chen if it came to that. Chen didn't leave. He sat in the armchair I had just vacated and waited. Did he think that Tetsuo would just leave and he could continue to harass me? We finished Tetsuo's paper in about an hour. I took my time explaining certain grammar points and spelling patterns, hoping that we could take long enough and Chen would give up and go away. But he didn't. Tetsuo got up and stood between my stalker and me. "Let's get some dinner." He picked up my stuff, took my hand, and pulled me down the stairs without a second glance at Chen. We didn't get dinner. For obvious reasons, I didn't have an appetite. Tetsuo did walk me home though, and I told him all about Chen. He said that until finals were over and until I left the university to go home for the summer, he would act as my bodyguard. He said he would take me to all my classes and stay with me outside of class. He was true to his word, but Chen always was within view. The day of my last exam and the day I was leaving, I met with Tetsuo in the study building. We looked around and didn't see Chen. With that, I said I was going to buy a coffee from the cafe. Upon entering the cafe, I rushed to the counter and ordered my usual, a medium black coffee. My blood turned to ice as a voice behind me said, "Make it a large one on me." Chen, he was always hidden in the cafe, knowing that I would be going there for my coffee like always. "Nah," I told the woman behind the counter. "My usual medium, please. I'll be paying for it myself, too." "Let me," he insisted. There was a little bit of back and forth between us. Thinking that we were a couple or something, the woman behind the counter smiled and said, Just let the guy get you a cup of coffee." I begrudgingly agreed and rushed away as soon as it was in my hand. He was still paying. He caught up to me before I could reach Tetsuo, though. So close. There was a pillar in the way, though, so Tetsuo couldn't see me. Every time I tried to move, Chen stepped into my path and stopped me. He began begging again. Marriage, family, China. No, no, and no. Tetsuo realized I was taking too long and came to rescue me, telling Chen to stay away from me. As we were walking away, Chen said, "I won't give up. Not ever. Not even if you marry someone else." I took my last exam and moved back to Illinois that evening. I did find Chen on my Facebook and blocked him. It wasn't hard to locate him after he started liking all my photos. I studied abroad in Japan for a year and had to go back for my uni for senior year. I had a boyfriend then who is now my husband. A friend and I rented a house just off campus, but the internet wasn't going to be set up for another few days, so I went to use the free Wi-Fi at the study building. While I was talking to my boyfriend, who was still in Japan, Chen appeared in front of me. He immediately began trying to talk to me, then noticed I was talking on the phone and decided to stand there silently staring and waiting. My blood went cold again and I began to panic, telling my boyfriend in Japanese what was happening. I told him about Chen while we were in Japan. He told me to run away or to find somebody nearby to help. Instead, the anger in me began to rise. I wasn't some pitiful little girl that needed help whenever something happened. When I was in Japan, I had experiences that demanded I stand up for myself, and this time wasn't any different. I looked at him and said, "I'm talking to my boyfriend, please leave me alone." He stood there staring at me for what felt like hours, though I'm sure it was only a few moments. After narrowing his eyes and glaring at my phone, he walked away. I managed to avoid him for most of the year, but I always saw him lurking nearby, staring. Because I was almost always surrounded by friends, though, he never dared to come near and beg for marriage again. He tried to approach me more than once when I was alone, but I made it clear to him that I would scream if he touched me. I kept to public places and made sure to never ever be in an empty place. I think it helped that Tetsu was usually by my side too. I live in Japan now with my husband. It's been 3 years since I graduated, and I haven't seen or heard from Chen since. I have lived in New York City all of my life, but this ranks as one of my oddest encounters. I probably owe my life to somebody I only met briefly. It was about 30 years ago, and I was coming out of my dentist's, who was located on a desolate side street between Penn Station and 7th Avenue, not far from Macy's Herald Square. At about 6:30 p.m., my dental work finished, and the sun was just starting to set. I walked out of the appointment only to run into a man who repeatedly intentionally body slammed me while pretending it was an accident. I had formed an intention to say nothing, but to slowly edge my way closer and closer to the open door of the chock full of nuts and make a quick dash for the entrance. Again and again the man said, "Excuse me, miss," and slammed into me from the street side as I tried to pick my way across the sidewalk to the open door. He must have stepped back and hit me 6 or 8 times when, out of nowhere, a large man stepped forward and said, "Miss, where are you going?" Terrified that they were a tag team, I said, "I'm trying to make my way to the 6th Avenue subway entry at Macy's." This mysterious guy grabbed me and propelled me so quickly the couple of blocks to the subway that my feet didn't touch the ground, even though I was a young woman of large size and a former distance runner who would move with great speed. The mysterious man took me right to the train, then disappeared. My dad said he was probably a plainclothes cop. I never knew who he was or what the other guy was trying to pull, but I will always be grateful for having been saved from something quite potentially bad. I've been lurking on this page for the last 2 years, but I've always been too scared to tell my story. Funnily enough, I stumbled across this thread by complete accident just after my encounter, while looking for a way to rationalize or come to terms with myself over what happened. I've had some creepy encounters in my time, but I've never had something as full-blown as this. This experience single-handedly put my life on hold and gave me a whole range of stress and anxiety. Throwaway account to protect my own identity, as well as being a first-time poster. This happened approximately 2 years ago. I was around 18 and I had been moving houses quite a lot before I finally moved into my current house and also the house these events take place in. I was working at some shitty commission-only job in the city while living in the area of my city known to be extremely rough around the edges and for its high crime rates. A few people in my town drive beautiful sports cars, despite living in crappy houses, and I fell in love with the gold one that I was constantly seeing around the streets. I can't exactly pinpoint exactly where it started, but one day I was leaving my town's shopping center, probably picking up pet food or munchies. Sounds about right, to be honest, when I picked up on a car driving erratically behind me, swerving through multiple lanes of traffic to keep up with me and trying to get my attention. The car was full of men aged 20 to 30, and once they realized I had seen them, they were ecstatic. I passed it off as boys being boys and just some odd catcall, and I turned into a side street so as not to lure them to my house. I was new to the area and didn't realize I turned into a dead-end street that linked back around to the road I was on, and to my annoyance, these guys followed. Not wanting to delay getting home, I decided to just speed like a maniac to my street, pull a U-turn in the side street next to my house, small cars for the win, quickly pull into my driveway, and park the car behind my house and out of view from the street. Satisfied, I took my keys out of the car and walked around to the front door. I remember being a naive idiot smirking to myself while noticing this car full of guys hadn't made the U-turn in time and were now driving slowly up and down my street looking for me. I felt like a complete badass and went inside. But here's where the creepiness begins. It was about a month or 2 after that encounter, and to get to work and avoid traffic, I was catching the train to the city, which was right near my house. One day in the afternoon while coming home from work, there was a semi-trailer driving down the road. Something not uncommon, as my street was off a major road between two towns, and we were constantly upgrading the road. The driver of the truck half leaned out the window and started catcalling me. I, being young, just decided to smile at this guy instead, hoping he'd just have a laugh and keep driving. Well, I was wrong. The guy instead turns off his truck and starts running towards me on the street. I had huge headphones in and didn't notice until he tapped me on the shoulder and offered me a cold energy drink. It was the middle of summer and still light outside on the main road. Thinking this guy posed no major threat, I accepted this drink and made small talk. For the life of me, I can't remember if I accidentally slipped up and revealed minor things that could reveal where I lived or even my name. I remember he kept bugging me for a phone number, so I finally just gave up and gave him my actual number, but with a digit changed on the end. This always worked in the past, and I just wanted to go home and chill out. The guy eventually hopped back in his truck and drove off. I remember smiling, thinking how awesome it was that I got a free drink, and then I got a little paranoid thinking that he bugged the can with a tracking device or something. I laughed it off, thinking of how stupid that was, posted the drink on my public Instagram, and went on with my day. A few weeks later, and there were some tradespeople working on my street. They'd occasionally catcall and come up with stupid one-liners that I'd post on my Facebook, laughing with my friends about how forward and amusing they were. I don't know if they were related, but after my experience, anything is possible. I was smoking up quite regularly around this point, and I started to feel paranoid in my home. At first, I brushed it off as a minor side effect of the weed. However, I couldn't quite shake the feeling of being watched. I started to receive phone calls from private numbers that wouldn't say anything on the other end. I joked with my friends about a stalker I had leaving cartons of beer on my driveway and switching the sensor lights on in the backyard near my bedroom window. I had a sensor light on my front porch stop working all of a sudden, and I assumed it had just blown out. I felt completely on edge, like I was being watched through the windows. I'd hear footsteps on my front porch when I was in the living room, and at night I would keep waking up for no reason. I'm a heavy sleeper, so it struck me as odd. I spammed calls to my local police station for weeks, telling them I thought somebody was in my backyard or on my front doorstep. However, by the time they would drive out, they'd take a look around the place, find nothing, see my red eyes, and just assume that I was another paranoid user. Eventually, my cat started acting strange. She started hissing and jumping at my bedroom window, running around the house and howling. I thought she was just seeing a neighborhood cat in the window and banging her tail on the thin glass, making it sound like knocking. Whenever I locked her out of my bedroom to get some sleep, she'd start wailing and panicking, clawing at my door to be let back in, only to once again slam into the window and keep up with her odd behavior. This started happening every night. One day I came home and my mom was livid. She handed me a note that was left on the front door, blamed my ex-boyfriend. He was an abusive POS and demanded I hand it in and go to the police in person. I took the note to the police. I think it said something like "found you, thought you could hide," or something along those lines, so all signs pointed to my ex. I calmly gave the police my ex's number in the note, and we all laughed about it, and they promised it would stop. It didn't. My friends started to grow concerned, and I told a few of them that I believed it was my ex. A few of my male friends, bless them, made a game out of waiting for my ex to come back to my house so they could take matters into their own hands. They would drive by a few nights to make sure I was okay, and I started sleeping with the lights on. One night, it was 1 a.m. I was awoken up by my cat howling and my phone ringing off the hook. "Get out of your house now. It's not your ex." It was one of my friends. I panicked, grabbed my cat, packed a bag, and sped to my friend's house. That night, everything fell into place. My friends had noticed a man lightly tapping on my window and staring at me around 12:30. The man noticed he was being watched and quickly peeled off in his gold sports car. While I drove to another friend's house to be consoled, my other friends followed this man half across the city, trying to confront him. Eventually, he turned into a block of apartments and ran inside. Spooked out and deciding they didn't have enough manpower or intimidation, they decided to call it a night, call the cops, and come back later to suss the guy out. The next day, the police turned up at the house, did a small look around, and left, claiming that there was no evidence and nothing they could do. A few days later, my friends, not accepting this for an answer, decided to come back to the apartment and start looking around. They asked a few neighbors for a guy matching their description, and while they did know the man, he wasn't very sociable and his car had apparently not been around for a few days. A week later, I received a box of items on my front doorstep and my heart sank. There were photos, dozens of them of me at work, in my house, sleeping, catching the train. Photos of my friends, photos that I didn't even know how they were taken. A small book containing Tumblr, YouTube, and Instagram addresses, my hobbies, where I worked, etc. The most concerning of all was the light bulb to my front porch and some underwear that had gone missing from my clothesline, all neatly piled together in this box. And then it just stopped after that. I never received anything else, and my friends watched my house for a few weeks and saw nothing. The scariest thing is I can never put a face to a name, and I constantly live on the edge of whether or not this will happen again. Sometimes I have sleepless nights, like tonight where I stay awake listening out for a tap at the window or footsteps on the driveway, but nothing ever happens. I met my boyfriend a month after this happened, and even he can't believe me sometimes and calls me paranoid. It's a horrible feeling to feel unsafe in your own home, but it's an even worse feeling to question your own sanity and never know how this all started. I am getting better slowly, but I will admit I'll probably never be the same openly cheerful person I was before. I browse this sub every night before bed, reading all of your encounters, and I'd also like to thank you all for making me feel somewhat included and secure in the community. Even though I don't post often, I always fall asleep feeling less alienated from the world in some horrible twisted way.